Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this regular meeting of the El Paso MPO. Today is June 21st, 2019. It is 9:04 a.m. This session is now in order. We can please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Then I do want to welcome to the meeting Representative Lizarraga. Welcome. Okay, that'll put us to open comment period.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good news.
Right. Jennifer Wright with the Texas Department of Transportation. And I just wanted to complain about the Texas Department. No, not really. I wanted to offer some information that will affect many of you this weekend. We are having 27-hour closures right through the heart of El Paso at the Spaghetti Bowl. I-10 will be closed in both directions. And the detour sends everybody up 54 to take the U-turn lane at Pershing, which we have widened and improved to take trucks and greater capacity, but the turning radius is greater, and then back whether you're headed east or west. So I just wanted to remind you, if you're headed west, you get a double bonus. I-10 West will be closed at Sunland Park Drive, but the detour is onto the CD lanes. The only thing tricky about that is that once you get to Mesa, everybody's forced off of I-10, goes through 3 signals, and then gets back on after red. So please be aware, if you have errands to run this weekend, try to get them done on Saturday. If you're crossing town, you might want to choose an alternate route. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. And that's it for open comment at this point.
Unless Mr. Rooney has something to say before.
Yes.
Mr. Rooney? Four. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right. So we'll move on to item number 1, approve the minutes of the April 26, 2019 TPB meeting.
So move.
I have a motion on the floor to approve. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. The minutes for April 26, 2019 have been approved. Item number 2. Minnesota, if you can read that for the record, please.
Yes. Item number 2 is approve the amendments to the federal fiscal year 2018-2019 Unified Planning Work Program to increase and add the following. A, decrease $255,000 from subtask 5.1 active transportation system. B, increase subtask 2.2 congestion management process by $135,000. C, increase subtask 3.3 models of regional planning cooperation by $60,000. D, increase subtask 4.3 air quality transportation by $55,000. And E, add subtask 5.3 regional mobility strategy with corresponding budget of $5,000.
Good morning, I'm Isela with the El Paso MPO. The Unified Planning Work Program, or the UPWP, is the document that spells out how the MPO will use the federal funds that it receives for MPO operation. The UPWP is broken down into 5 tasks: administration, data development, short-range planning, long-range planning, and special studies. On this current UPWP, we had budgeted we had budgeted a full cost for the active transportation system, and then it turned out that it was just going to be a pilot. And so now that we know we're not going to use all the funds, we would like to request your approval to move those monies to activities that we are currently working on, which are the congestion management plan, process, the regional coordination, the air quality transportation, and then also to add the new task for the regional mobility strategy. And so we're requesting your approval to do the budget transfer.
Okay, now, I know I'm gonna change this a little bit, but I'm gonna entertain a motion to approve this item, and then I'll open up for discussion. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion on the floor, and the motion has been seconded. Discussion by the board? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Abstention. Motion carries unanimously. Item number 2 has been, excuse me. Oh, there was public comment on that one, too. Go ahead.
Mr. Scott White for public comment.
Good morning, Scott White with Bella Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. Here we have a chance to do something that would be really landmark in this region, to truly study active transportation and how it can improve all these issues. We talk about congestion mitigation, air quality improvement. Easiest way to do a lot of this stuff is simply to get people out of cars, not for necessarily long trips, but for the short trips. And you do that by making it easy for people to walk, to bike, to take transit. These are all the kind of things that we need to be looking at as a long-term solution to the issues here in El Paso. We cannot keep continuing to do the same thing that we have been and assume that that's going to work. That's the definition of insanity. We need to be looking at new approaches to our transportation issues. We've given a token nod at times to walking and to biking. We're going to have a presentation here shortly on the Paso del Norte Trail. We've got a call for TAP projects. All of those things say we need a better plan for this region's mobility that isn't just the standard solution. We need walkability. We need bikeability. We need land use reform that's built around livable neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods. We need better transit. But we can't do that if we don't take the steps to actually study the needs and find a way to incorporate them into our long-term plans. A pilot study's not going to do that. We need this investment for our region and for all the people who rely on active transportation. I have the choice to ride my bike for transportation. There are so many people who don't have that choice. They have to walk. They have to ride a bike because their economic situation. And we need to make sure that in the greater scope of things, their needs are taken into consideration as well. Thank you.
Was there anyone else on public comment?
No, nobody else.
All right. I'm going to call the vote once again. All those in favor of item number 2 say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Abstentions. Motion carries unanimously. Item number 2 has been approved. Item number 3, approve the updated El Paso MPO Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 Program Management Plan.
Isela again from the El Paso MPO. The program management plan is the plan that describes how the MPO will manage the 5310 program. The 5310 funds are used to enhance mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. So FTA reviewed our plan and they had some recommendations. The first one was for us to list the type of activities that we do when we manage the 5310 plan. And so we added that we do vehicle inspections, we do data collection, and then we also prepare the project calls. Another recommendation was to describe how it is that we reach out to the public transportation providers. And we do this through email blast, we do this through our website, and then when we do the project calls, we do place an ad in the newspaper. And then the last item is they wanted us to explain how we meet the civil rights requirements, and we do that through our certs and assurances as well as our Title VI plan. We did put the plan out for a 30-day public involvement, but we didn't receive any comments. And so we're requesting your approval to approve the updated program management plan.
At this moment, I would entertain a motion to approve item number 3.
So moved.
I have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We'll do a discussion right after the motion. The motion has been seconded. Discussion by the board?
Just, Eduardo, one question is that I had an opportunity to do some work with the Opportunity House, And they had not known about this program, because I think they would be eligible to maybe to buy a van or two, which they're desperately in need of. So you may want to, whatever you're doing for the outreach, because it seems like we don't get, they would be a perfect example of them applying for a van or two. Somehow, some way, we need to go deeper in outreach so these nonprofit or agencies know of this program, because they didn't know anything about it. And we've told them now, so they know, but I'm sure there's other groups out there that aren't knowing about it. And I think that, I don't know how many applications we get a year, but I know we don't get a whole lot.
Right.
And it seems like there's groups out there that would be able to get it, but I don't think they know anything about it.
Right. We will definitely
Okay.
take a look at what we did in terms of outreach and spreading the word on this to make sure that everybody finds out about this.
Any other discussion by the board? Seeing none, although, is there, no, there's no public comment on that? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Abstentions. Motion carries unanimously. Item number 3 has been approved. Item number 4, approve a resolution of support of the Paso del Norte Trail.
Mr. Chair, if I can introduce the item. If you recall, in the April Policy Board meeting, as part of my report, I gave you all a heads up on the project that you're going to hear about. And today, we have Jana Renner from the Paso del Norte Health Foundation to give the presentation. And the request of the board is to approve or pass a resolution in support of the project.
Okay.
Are you going to get more copies, or?
And I can get more copies too.
Okay. So,
Good morning, everyone.
there's some copies here of the presentation,
Well, it's the master plan.
of the master plan, I'm sorry. So, we'll have them here. If anybody's interested in having a copy, let me know. And if not, we'll pass them electronically maybe to the rest of the board.
Oh, fine. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jana Renner. I'm a program officer at the Paso del Norte Health Foundation. Thank you for having me here today. You all are probably aware of the fact that for many years there's been a vision for a county line trail across El Paso County, starting with the river trail that was developed many years ago in the Upper Valley. A couple of years ago, stakeholders came together to start revisioning this idea. At the Health Foundation, we're really interested in providing more opportunities for residents to be active, and trails are a way to do that. But we also recognize that trails can be used for a number of things, including recreation and economic development as well. There are, in addition to the trail in the Upper Valley, there are some completed segments. Last year, the Paso del Norte Health Foundation funded the construction of a 3.4-mile trail along the Playa Drain from Escatete Park to Riverside Park. There are other completed segments along the Playa Drain that the city has also constructed along Independence Drive and between Isleta High School and Capistrano Park. There's one segment along the Playa Drain that hasn't been constructed, but we are in the process of completing the design work for that now, and that's between Riverside High School and Isleta High School. The trail that was constructed last year also has plenty of trail amenities. If you all have been out there, you've probably seen them, but we wanted this to be a demonstration of what trails could look like in our region. So also over the past 2 years, we did work with Sight Southwest out of Albuquerque to develop a trail master plan. And we met with a number of stakeholders and had community meetings and came up with a trail alignment that would be the spine of the county line trails. In talking to a lot of people in the county, we also learned of other interests to have spurs and loops along the trail as well. And in the master plan, those are included. But what you'll see here is the spine of the of the proposed trail that goes from the Upper Valley using the current trail, connecting on through UTEP and downtown, and eventually connecting to the Franklin Canal and going out into the county line. And this slide just shows the percentage of the trail that's in each jurisdiction for your information. And I believe that's all. Oh, no. The reason I'm here is I'm requesting approval for you all to sign a resolution in support of the trail. So far, we've approached the city and the county, the RMA, and the city of Socorro, and all have signed resolutions as well. I believe that's all.
At this moment, I would entertain a motion to approve item number 4.
So moved.
I have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded. Discussion?
Yes, from your presentation and the percentage of ownership, we've got everyone here in El Paso County. I remember in some of the initial meetings that we were having on this trail, that we had some people from, including a state senator from New Mexico. And so my question is, are we still contemplating potentially linking up with
Yes.
the trail coming down from
Yes.
Las Cruces to Anthony?
Yes, we are. We have been to, our CEO, Tracy Yellen, has been to the meetings that in Doña Ana County that have, when they've been discussing that trail, and that is the vision, is that the trail would link to that New Mexico trail.
All right. Well, I think that would be very important to have that link made in order to have one of the most unique trails in the country.
Right.
Covering, from New Mexico all the way down to the southern part of the El Paso County, southeastern part. And I certainly support this. I think this is one of those projects that hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention, but which, as you pointed out, from other communities in Atlanta and other places, these kinds of trails, and ours would be even more unique than theirs, have been a tremendous boost to economic development, to heritage tourism, to people that like the outdoors. So I commend you and the foundation and Tracy for having followed through on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It says here that you all are looking to secure funding from Texas Department of Transportation. Where have you identified those funds within TxDOT?
We've been working with Creosote Collaborative, and they've identified some funding. The TASA, I believe it's called TASA, is something that we're considering. So transportation alternatives, and there's also a list of other funding funding opportunities. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? So we have looked at TASA, and we are also identifying other funding opportunities outside of that as well. We're bringing together people to form an advisory committee so we can start prioritizing segments based on funding that's available.
And what is TASA?
Transportation alternatives.
Right. And has our region ever benefited from these TASA funds?
That I don't know.
Yeah, see, these are programs that, from TxDOT that they were called enhancement and TAP, and now it's TASA. But what is very significant is that if you go back to the ownership, the trail, this is, of course, of the entire trail, but each individual, municipality or government can request TASA funds for their segment. In other words, this can be built in pieces. So, all of the groups that are part of the MPO can apply for that little piece.
So the MPO can't apply it on its own. It's got to be these individual
Correct.
entities.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion by the board? Seeing none, I do have a motion on the floor, and the motion has been seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Abstentions. Motion carries unanimously. Item number, there was comments también on that one. Well, the motion carries, but we'll entertain the comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Rooney.
Can I come
Yes.
Mike Rooney, thank you for approving this. I commend your folks for sharing this idea with our community. When the Playa Drain initiative was covered in the media, I sent Tracy Yellen an email because that ugly scar across the lower valley was a concern. A former YSD superintendent, Tony Trujillo. It was an area where school kids could get in trouble and get hurt. Over the years, I've heard many complaints that the lower valley and northeast get neglected, with the west side and east side and central getting the bulk of our resource money. I like your plan. I like that your plan provides walking, biking, and provides for outdoor general health activities. In addition, it is expandable, plus incorporates other trails that have already been developed in some fashion. Former Councilwoman Quintana worked with Representative Pickett and Senator Shapley to get legislation passed so the El Paso wire utilities could be open. So keep that in mind as you're developing your plan. We have bike lanes, which people like me see don't really get that much use. While our area where our drivers have to deal daily with crappy, cracked, rough, and pothole streets, plus badly faded roadway stripings. So this is a good initiative. What I like is it's kind of multi-use. My youngest brother, Tim, was one of the last casualties of the Vietnam War, and he lived his life in a wheelchair. And I don't know if that was the Arizona drain. I think it's part of the Canal Complex area in Phoenix, and they apparently covered over the canal in that area. I think it was between 48th and 52nd Street. And he used to take it when he was younger to keep his strength up in his arm, because your arms were his mobility. He would go down and roll on that. And one time I came home and I asked my mother, "Where's my brother?" And she said, "He's out walking." And I said, "What?" And she says, "He goes down there every day and uses that trail to exercise." So I like that you incorporate different walking, people, a lot of different activities instead of just one exclusive thing that you can see people really aren't using as much as they're hyped. So great job. Thank Tracy and keep up the great work.
Thank you, Mr. Rooney.
Mr. Scott White?
Good morning again. Once again, Scott White from El Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. Thank you for the support of this project. But these are the kind of projects that only touch the tip of the iceberg. Imagine if we had trails like this all across the community. Mr. Rooney pointed out that we have a great many of utility easements that could as well receive trails. But then again, these are also just the tip of the iceberg. We need to make sure people have safe routes for all ages, all abilities, everywhere. When we don't think of these trails as transportation, when we only think of them as recreation, we miss the value that they bring to this community. They give options to people. These aren't transportation alternatives, these are transportation options. And we need to be thinking that way. How do we bring this to a reality, not just for this trail, but all through the entire community, so that everyone can benefit? Because these kind of trails have made incredible differences everywhere they've been installed. You go, whenever you travel, go find a trail, look at the people who are using them, how they're using them, and how they impact these communities. And the best trails lead to stronger, more resilient communities. people being able to get out and they can walk to work or walk to school, ride their bike wherever they want. These are the game changers because people don't have to interact with traffic when you're on these routes. And that's what people are afraid of with some of these bike lanes. As Mr. Rooney mentioned, they don't get used because what we're doing with traffic these days, making sure people can drive faster, that scares the heck out of a lot of people. They want to know that if they get out and they walk, they get out on the ride, they want to be able to do so safely. That's their primary concern, and that's why trails like this make such a difference for the population. They know that if they go for that walk, they don't have to worry about that traffic. Let's look at these kind of options, and this is why I said we needed that study. How do we bring these to the entire community? Not just on the playa drains and utility easements, but across our entire community so that everyone benefits. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Mayor?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that this trail, in addition to being unique when it links with New Mexico, goes not only along the river, but it goes through neighborhoods. It goes through Sunset Heights, it goes through UTEP, and through other areas down in the lower valley that will take people that are interested in our history and our heritage in ways that you may not find in other trails. That's just, a wilderness trail or some trail that has only one feature to it. This proposal is very unique. And if you look at the maps, you will see, Mr. White, that it goes through some neighborhoods, and it was deliberately designed that way in order to expose people from not only our own community, but outside of El Paso to what El Paso is all about. Oh, just thought I'd mention that. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay. Moving on to item number 5, direct the executive committee to review and suggest amendments to the El Paso MPO bylaws.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'll be very quick. I know we have many agenda items. The EC has already been tasked with looking at the bylaws to review the attendance policy and some of the committee structures. And I'll go in further detail during, it's listed as one of the reports. But as we were going through this process, we realized that there were other parts of the bylaws that required some updates. One of them dealt with some ethics policies that are in the bylaws, but we don't believe that are being fully followed. And so we want to be sure that we're following our bylaws. And some other procedural matters such as this. When we looked at the agenda language, we realized that we couldn't take up those issues without putting another item on the agenda today to give the EC the ability to review those items. So this is just simply a more broadly worded agenda item to allow the EC to go back and look at those items for further review.
So at this moment, pretty much we're looking for a motion to direct the executive committee to review the El Paso MPO bylaws.
That's correct.
So I have a motion on the floor, and the motion has been seconded. Discussion by the board.
So what would be the process then of the executive committee is going to review the bylaws and then make a report to the chair or make a report to the group again of what you're looking at, or?
So the goal right now, so as it pertains to the attendance policy and to the committees, I think, as I'll go in my report, I think we've reached a consensus and a recommendation, but we didn't want to present, we didn't want to have multiple meetings where there were changes to the bylaws because there's a certain 10-day requirement where the TPB has to be notified 10 days in advance, and generally it's just not good practice to continually amend the bylaws. We really haven't had a chance to go into discussion regarding those procedural items and the ethics items. So we'll have, the goal is to have everything by the July meeting. But it would require a special meeting by the EC to get that within the 10-day time frame.
Any other discussion by the board? Seeing none, I do have a motion on the floor, and the motion has been seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Abstentions. Motion carries unanimously. Item number 5 has been approved. Item number 6, Marisa, if you can read that for us, please.
Yes. Item number 6, to approve the June 2019 Project Readiness Report and amend the Destino 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Destino 2019-2022 Transportation Improvement Program.
You can,
Sorry. And to reprogram the following projects from fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2020. A, Bicycle Connectivity Infrastructure Improvements Phase 1, MPOID M087A/CSJ 0924-06542/Sponsor City of El Paso. Construction bike facilities citywide using $1,500,260 of Category 5 Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Funds. B, Paso del Norte Port of Entry Roundabout, MPOID C035X/CSJ 0924-09539, Sponsor City of El Paso. Design and construct a one-lane roundabout with limits from El Paso Street at 6th Avenue using $1,489,645 of Category 5 CMAQ funds. And C, Loop 375, Purple Heart widening and construction of frontage roads, MPOID F057X/CSJ 2552-02-028, sponsored TxDOT. Construction of Fordage Road with limits from Spur 601 to US 62 to 180 Montana Avenue using $37,274,800 of Category 2 M and $7,389,725 of Category 4 funds for a total 17 million. Sorry. $17,389,725 of Category 4 funds for a total of $54,664,525.
Good morning. Greg McNichol, I'm chairman of the TPAC committee. Just to remind y'all first that we do this report quarterly, and it's obviously to kind of track and check and make sure all the projects are going to stay within the funding year. We stay a lot of focus on obviously like 2019 right now. And so we do have some amendments that we're going to recommend, and they're getting ready to get changed on you. So let me go ahead and speak to that, if I may, first before we review the report. On A, the City of El Paso is really, really close to getting this one to pass and to go forward. And so what they're asking us, and the recommendation to you, is to table this item till July, because they feel like they can make it, and it looks good. So, when again, we don't want to lose the funds, and we have one last chance, if you will, when we come back in July to present this to you. Okay. On item B, the letter of authority that we were waiting on has now been received. And so this one moved from what we call a red category to no concern. Okay, so this one we're going to ask just be deleted. And then item number C, the TxDOT project, is one that we're asking to go ahead and move from funding year 2019 to 2020. Again, this safeguards the money, makes it much easier for the project to move forward. They're making good progress on that project, but they need a little bit more time. So we can review the projects now, but that'll be the three elements I would like you all to consider related to A, B, and C.
Are there any motions?
Move to approve the changes.
I have a motion on the floor to approve changes. The motion has been seconded. Discussion by the board? Yes, sir.
Yeah, on A, on the bicycle improvements, did I understand you to say that the proposal here was to move these projects to 2020, but on item A, it's still possible to get that done this year, so we have until July to ensure that those funds are secured for the completion of the project?
Yeah, we're asking that you table item A, so we'll not take a vote on A. I'd ask you just table that one, and we'll bring it back in July if necessary. We're actually hoping and anticipating the project will be resolved, and it'll be in a no concern rate at that point.
All right.
Because we're trying to keep it moving forward.
Yeah, thank you.
So I might ask for Mr. Marcus to amend his motion to table item A, delete item B, and approve item C.
Accept amendment.
Okay. Is everyone on the same page on that? Understand the motion at this point?
Excuse me, Mr. Marcus, what did you say?
We accept the,
Oh.
proposed amendment to the motion. We're gonna table item A, we're gonna delete the item B, and we're gonna approve item C.
Second. Okay, I'll have that as part of the main motion, main original motion. Any other discussion?
Just to hold everybody here, TxDOT's project on Purple Heart, just can you comment on that?
There we go.
Good morning. Eddie Voltaire, Texas Department of Transportation. So the project goes from Spur 601 all the way to Montana. It adds a center lane. It also adds frontage roads for that limit. The project is done. Plans are 100%. Right-of-way is 100%. Well, right-of-way is we're able to go into agreement with Fort Bliss, and our environmental is clear. The issue right now is that there's a third-party petroleum line that runs right underneath or in between the frontage road and the main lanes. We're realigning the main lane so that petroleum line has to be relocated. Because it's third-party, we're not involved in it. They have to get their own environmental clearance. They have to get their own right-of-way documents to relocate onto Fort Bliss property. Pretty lengthy process. They ran into some hiccups, and so we're not allowed to go in and construct until they clear their environmental.
Okay, so the project, there's no real issue with the project other than time?
Exactly, yeah. It's ready. If the petroleum line wasn't there, then we'd be able to move on that project.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I do have a motion on the floor, and the motion has been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously.
Procedural one, I don't know if you need to actually then approve item 6 as amended. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if that's necessary or not. I would defer to legal.
My understanding at this point is the entire thing has been approved with
Okay.
item 6A.
With those changes. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Item number 7, notice of proposed changes by the executive committee to the El Paso MPO bylaws. A, Article 3, attendance. B, Article 8, committees.
Is the report already?
Yes.
Okay. First, I really want to thank the members of the executive committee, Mr. Chuck McMahon, Trent Doolittle, Representative Blanco, Mayor Margot, and Alderman Miller. There's really been a high participation rate at all of these meetings, and there's been a good dialogue. I also want to thank staff and our legal counsel, who were very instrumental in researching best practices at other MPOs to provide us with these recommendations. This is just really just a report. There will be further action in July that we will ask for. But just to let you know where we are today, of these 2 items where the EC was authorized to look at, one was the attendance policy. And for those of you who have been on the MPO long enough may remember that before we had an attendance policy, because this board is so large and we require a quorum of 16, we often had difficulty achieving that quorum. There would be times where many members would be here until 9:30 before the meeting was canceled due to lack of quorum. So we then implemented an attendance policy, and as it stands today, essentially there's 3 cumulative absences, which allows any member to miss 25% of the meetings. After that, a member loses their voting privileges. Since that policy has been in place, we have not had any quorum issues. There was an issue last month, but I think that was an exception because there were a lot of events that particular day, but we have not had the situation as we had in the past where we were waiting around before the meeting had to be canceled. So various ideas were kicked around. One of them was to allow just an additional absence, 4 general absences, which would allow a member to then miss 1/3 of the MPO meetings. There were other recommendations that were as high as 6 permitted absences for members. The issue with that is that, if a member racks up 6 absences, I'm sure then we'll be pretty close to the end of the fiscal year, and then a person would gain their voting privileges again pretty soon. And again, the purpose of this isn't necessarily to be punitive, it's to encourage attendance and participation in these meetings. So what the executive committee came up with in amending the current 3 absence rule is where everybody would be permitted 2 unexcused absences. After the second unexcused absence, a member would then lose their voting privileges, but everybody would also be granted 2 excused absences. And I believe that it's intended to be for official purposes. If you look at the language, let's see, what page is that on? Excused absences are those related to the following: personal illness, family emergency, jury duty, or fulfillment of obligation arising out of elected office. And so the members of the EC felt that this combination of both excused and unexcused absences would be sufficient, a sufficient amendment to the policy where we wouldn't go back to the days where we had quorum issues, but it would also still encourage participation here at the TPB. Any questions or comments on that? I know we're not posted for discussion, but I mean, there's certainly, if anybody has any suggestions or discussions, and if you don't want to address them here, you can also contact me at any time before we bring these for a final vote next month. The other item that we were tasked with looking at was committee structure. And so in the bylaws, there are several committees that are there, but that currently aren't being used. I think there were 6, and they're listed here in your backup: Congestion Management Process Committee, and then a Transportation Finance Committee, a Suburban Mobility Committee, Transit Committee, and then the TPAC Committee, as well as the EC. It's not good to have these committees in the bylaws if they're not going to be used. And ultimately, after discussion, the Executive Committee thought that it would probably be best just to get rid of these committees that aren't being used, stick with the Executive Committee and the TPAC Committee, as those are 2 of the most active, but then make better use. Currently, we have the chairman has the ability to select ad hoc committees that can address any particular topic, and we felt that the combination of the EC and TPAC and this ad hoc structure is probably best for this board and some of the governance issues that we have, rather than having these committees that perhaps even if we were to keep them active on the bylaws, probably wouldn't meet very often or would have attendance issues. But so the board thought that the ad hoc committee structure was sufficient on that front. And the other change was something that Mayor Margot had indicated, is that of a lot of the boards that many of us serve on, he says that it was unusual that the chairperson isn't part of the the chair is not part of the executive committee. And that's something that the committee also discussed and felt that the chair should probably be part of the executive committee as well. I can tell you that when we were going through the hiring process, for example, the members of the EC were very involved in that process, in the interview process, and talking with everyone, and trying to also work on contract negotiations. But when it came to the final step in the process of the contract negotiations, it then fell on the chairman to hammer out the particulars of the contract, but the chairman wasn't involved throughout the whole process. So it sort of created this unusual situation where the chairman was trying to negotiate something that he did not have a lot of time to review. Ultimately, it worked out. I think we got a good contract, but those were some of the things that the committee had identified. Again, this will be brought. The goal is to have these at our July meeting, along with some of the other issues that were identified, so we can just bring one package at the July meeting. But again, that would require a special meeting by the EC to allow for that 10-day period, the 10-day review period by the TPB. Again, if you all have any suggestions or anything you'd like to discuss here, please feel free. Or if not, please feel free to send me an email at another time.
Commissioner?
Judge, go ahead.
We had discussed the consideration during the legislation sessions for our legislator and our senator in respect to attendance. Was there any discussion about that?
Yes, and I think the committee's we're going to have to go back and have some more discussions on that. But so there is a provision in our bylaws when we look at the attendance policy that there is this legislative exemption That's what you're referring to, right?
The
The legislative exemption where members of the legislature are essentially exempted from the attendance policy. And so part of the goal also was to I think, with these 4 absences, put enough absences in there that would also apply to the legislative delegation. As I don't know, Representative Blanco, if you wanted to talk about that, but there are, I think, as the legislative session progresses, there are certainly, it gets much more intense, as the Speaker Pro Tem would know. But the goal was that perhaps the legislative exemption could be removed, since that perhaps now with the 4 absences there would be sufficient absences during a legislative session. That needs to be fleshed out a little bit more in our following discussion before we bring it to you for a final vote. But that was the discussion. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. There was Senator had to.
Go ahead, Representative.
Okay, in looking at the recommended amendments, and I know that it's now been postponed until July, I guess I was not clear in terms of what the last sentence meant when it said the attendance policy will continue to be suspended for those members attending regular or special legislative sessions and who can demonstrate attendance. So did that mean the suspension in terms of attendance, that we wouldn't be required, and that would not be included in the other 2 excused absences, because that was the way it was left there, actually?
Right. So I don't know if so yes, as it stands right now, that the provision remains. There was something that was brought to my attention after the EC, and so the EC hasn't had an opportunity to discuss this further. But that's where it stands now. We need to go back as the EC, but as it stands right now, there would be this exemption.
Right. So according to the way the recommendation is right now, and the way I read it, is that yes, we would continue with that exemption while we're required to be in session.
That's correct.
And that would not count under the excused absences? Because I got a little confused on what you just said, that you were considering it counting, but then the way the recommendation reads, that's not what it says.
If I might answer, that discussion is there to remove the exemption completely. And we have had that discussion in executive committee, and I assume that we were going to continue to have that discussion. We do need some feedback on that. But it was...
Can we clarify on that? So, Sergio Estrada, for the record, we at the EC committee, we did discuss the possibility of removing the special exemption for members of this board that are also part of the Texas state delegation. However, after that meeting concluded, upon further research, we found a provision in the Texas Transportation Code that regulates MPOs that specifically says that, and I will read it to the board right now, a legislative member of a policy board may not be counted as absent at a meeting of the policy board during a legislative session. So based on that provision, the EC is going to meet again, and probably the recommendation may be that we leave that language as is.
So that's why that last sentence was placed in the recommendation?
That's correct.
Right, so that was kind of contrary to what was being explained.
Right, and so, well, first again, and so I want to really thank our legal counsel. He's done a phenomenal job, but again, that was brought up, so the executive committee has not had any discussion on what he just mentioned. And so that's just...
Counsel, for further clarification on legislators, is there a provision that says that legislators cannot lose their vote? Isn't that something that was discovered in you all's review on this issue, that legislators cannot lose their vote regardless of how many absences they have?
I have not seen a provision that states that expressly, Representative. What I have found is a provision that says that you are not to be counted absent if you are attending a legislative session, which means that if our bylaws say that after a certain amount of accumulated absences, you lose your right to vote, any absences that you incur while attending the legislative session will not count towards that death penalty, if you will.
We understand that part, but I guess, Mr. Calvo, my district director, Cito Negron, had a meeting with you, and he reported back to me that you all had discovered that legislators cannot lose their vote. What was that based on?
Well, I think what Sergio just described is that you cannot be counted absent. So if you're not counted absent, then, let's say the 5 absences that you may have during the legislative session doesn't count against your losing your vote.
Yeah.
But I don't think anywhere did we.
No.
Does it say that we have found that you cannot lose your vote? You can
Okay.
lose your vote
Thank-
if.
That would be a broader interpretation of what's actually spelled out in the law.
All right, well, thank you for that clarification. One last point in terms of recommendations, since the chairman is asking for us to give some input. I understand why we're doing away with some of the subcommittees that don't meet, but leaving the option of establishing ad hoc committees. It is my understanding that there is some discussion about those ad hoc committee meetings not being subject to the Open Meetings Act. And if that's the case, I think there's an issue with that. I'd like to point that out. I mean, if you're going to have an ad hoc committee that's part of the MPO, a governmental entity, seems to me that in the interest of transparency, we would always have those meetings, or whatever ad hoc committee is established, subject to the Open Meetings Act.
That is a good point, Senator, and perhaps, again, in trying to strike a balance with trying to have good government practices with such a large board, perhaps the board can set a policy where ad hoc committees, just as practice for this body, would be subject to the Open Meetings Act and would have the same posting requirements and reporting requirements. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may clarify on the committees also, from the staff perspective, when we were discussing this, the committees, we're not definitely saying that the activities or the responsibilities of these committees is important. It is very important for the operation of the MPO, for transparency, but at the same time, as Commissioner Bettis said, we need to strike a balance, because as it is, every time that we have a formal committee meeting where we have to post, we need quorum. It could even backfire, because if that committee is scheduled to act for the congestion management process or for something else that is on a clock, and we can't move forward because there's no quorum or stuff like that, it backfires. We're shooting ourselves on the foot. But so from our perspective, it is very important to have these ad hoc committees to really help us in the efficient operation of the MPO and certainly, with transparency as well.
One thing I wanted to ask about is, was there any consideration on the quorum itself? For example, when the legislators go out, I mean, we're automatically counting with a less number of individuals, so that reduces the number of people who are here who need to attend. Was there any consideration of determining or having a different count for, or what classifies as a quorum?
Mr. Chairman, there was a conversation regarding quorum, and at least from my understanding, and legal counsel's here, there can't be any changes to the numbers required for the quorum, so it would remain at 16, because it's not as if, even though there may be absences, they still are part of the board, and so the quorum numbers wouldn't change. We had discussed, those items. Again, I really want to thank legal counsel. He's done a phenomenal job in really looking into these issues, but quorum would remain the same.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm over here. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. And just for a point of information, I really want to thank the Executive Committee for all y'all's hard work. I know that these conversations sometimes can be difficult. I want to just kind of create some, as the Executive Committee continues the conversations, and I understand how difficult it is when we do go away to session. I will say that this is my fourth term. My first term was a lot easier to get back here on a Friday. Now, multiple terms in, and I think Speaker Pro Tem can explain this. Now we are in different positions, luckily the delegation, that, now that I'm on appropriations, those do meet every day. And even if we may not be in a formal meeting, there are other meetings in which we're having. And I think that the fact that the delegation is struggling a little bit more to get back here to the meetings is not because we're not passionate about being here, but because our delegation has a seat at the table more than ever before, making it a lot harder, I think, to get back here than, when I was a baby rep, I could get back on a Friday mostly because I wanted to ride my horse, So I'm like, I'm going to come back early, get some horseback riding. Sadly, that has been a very difficult case this session. I'll give an example. I was on 3 committees. Appropriations, which starts early in the legislative session, starts in February, meets every single day. Public education, which would meet 16 hours a day. Local consent calendars. There's some point I think the struggle we're having in the MPO, while a difficult struggle for us locally, is a good struggle for us as a community because it means that our delegation is really at the table much more than ever. And so I'm sorry you're having to deal with it, but I also think it's in some ways a good problem to have that we're able to fully represent our community a little bit more. So thank you.
No, thank you, Representative. And I think I know each one of the representatives, honestly, in all the time that I've been here on the MPO, they have been very engaged in this process. So no, we definitely think, and I know Representative Ortega, you've also taken on additional responsibilities with other committees and things, and so we appreciate it. But it is duly noted, yes, and know that the representatives do that. But again, so state law would supersede our attendance policy in that respect, where again, it would not impact the number of absences permitted by state representatives.
Also, remind people that we're a unique MPO. We're the only MPO that has the entire delegation as a part of it in the state of Texas. Corpus Christi has one representative, and that's it. So we're kind of unique in that regard. So.
Well, I think this speaks, Mr. Chairman, thank you. A couple of months ago, Representative Ortega chaired a committee that provided some recommendations to downsize this MPO. It is concerning that we may not meet quorum because the delegation could be in session. And we've got major transportation projects and funding that requires movement. So I don't know if this is the appropriate time as we're looking at the bylaws to maybe revisit the downsizing of the MPO to make it a leaner, faster form of government. Because we're going to keep coming back at these issues. If we continue to not meet quorum, we're not going to meet our responsibilities to our federal partners to make these projects and move our community forward. So, I think I agree with Mayor Margot. There's only one representative from the delegation that serves on the MPO, and that was part of Representative Ortega's recommendations, is to keep the senator and one member, a rotating member of the delegation. And I think maybe that we need to revisit that. Representative?
I agree. I think that we need to reconsider that and revisit in terms of what needs to be done, because we shouldn't have a policy board that is so important as it is to our community where we can't make quorum. And so there has to be, I know that it was a very sensitive issue during the last discussion, but I think that we have to reconsider the composition and the size of the policy board. And even if we reconsider it, we don't know whether that's something that's going to be agreeable to the majority of the policy board members, but it doesn't hurt to look at it again.
And
we're going to go back to the same old thing we did about a year and a half ago. And we're talking about the reduction of our board members. But if you're going to take, some members of the delegation, because they're as a whole as we see it, correct? Is that what we're talking about? Then El Paso has more voting members than any of us. So if you want to reduce, then we have to also look at that aspect, because Socorro only has one vote. How many does El Paso have? How many does the delegation have? How many does the county have? How many does Anthony have? Or San Elizario? So it goes back. It's a touchy subject. I don't believe that we should just be picking on the delegation because they're not here. When if you put them as a voting block, El Paso has a bigger voting block too. So I don't think we can be picking on the delegation and try to downsize them. If we're going to downsize them, then we should look at other people who have more voting. And that's an issue. And to me, it's a very touchy subject because we get the backlash, the smaller municipalities. Because when we revisit this issue, we got dinged for it. We got dinged for it. Nobody talks about that. When it came down to, you know, contracts for the city of Socorro with the El Paso and stuff, we got dinged. So it is an issue. And when we start to talk about this, nobody really wants to do it.
Mayor, I for one want to do it. I have made it very clear that in my case, I don't mind being off the board and having just one, as the Mayor Margot pointed out, for the delegation. I don't have any problem with that. I think you're making a good point with regard to the representation of the other entities, especially El Paso. So if we really want to become lean and efficient and have a number that is workable, then I think your viewpoint deserves serious consideration, and it's very difficult because people don't want to give up their votes. I said I'm willing to give up my vote in the interest of something like what you're proposing.
You know, this has been a very difficult issue that you know, this board has been wrestling with for many, many years. And I do suspect the conversations are going to continue. And, you know, as the next, as we get these committee structures, you know, I suspect there might be an ongoing ad hoc committee that would continue to look at governance structure to see what recommendations can be made. You know, I did see some things in the bylaws, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, that you know, where there can be members who can be a part of the board but can suspend their voting privileges. But I think they still count for quorum, right? It would still count for quorum. So there are some mechanisms that perhaps we can. There are some mechanisms that perhaps you know maybe we can start off small. That you know perhaps we can downsize the board by a couple members. Then perhaps experiment with you know having you know some members serve in a capacity where they're part of the board, but maybe don't have voting privileges or count for quorum purposes. You know, because I mean, a lot of folks do bring expertise, you know, to this board, but it's just really the quorum issues that make governance a little bit difficult. And again, that's why we've had to, you know, sort of do policies like you know like this attendance policy and other things piecemeal, you know, to address the current status. But I suspect that's going to be an ongoing conversation.
Representative.
So maybe what we need to do is, like you were suggesting, is taking smaller steps on ultimately reaching what everybody is comfortable with concerning the composition of the board. So it possibly something that we can potentially look at on the bylaws again, but doing it in a more thoughtful, careful, thought out manner where we get majority consensus, and making sure that it's something that's not where we don't do a radical change right away.
Yeah. And I think that ultimately might lead to a better outcome. You know, I mean, personally, something that I've brought up is you know, is again the issue of having staff members serve on a policy board. And I'm not, I'll pick on Norma here because Norma's our staff at the county. You know, I think that you know, Norma's expertise is certainly valuable, and I value her insight, but I think it should be more in an advisory capacity. I don't think Norma should necessarily have a vote. I think that those making the decision should be the policymakers, and then it puts Norma in an awkward situation, right? If I mean, I don't think she's going to vote contrary to something it is that I do, you know, or take a position that's contrary to me or the county judge. So maybe again, if we look at something piecemeal, you know, we'll have to look at that. And then also just be mindful of, you know, how this whole problem arose was from how the bylaws were written. You know, the MPO was originally officed in City Hall and was part of the city of El Paso, and it was intended that, you know, as the MPO would grow, the city would also receive an additional vote. And, you know, here we are now in the year almost 2020, and, you know, we have a board of this size. So it's going to have to address all of those issues, but I'm confident.
Issues with regard to the smaller communities, as well as making sure that the city has sufficient representation and that they have a voice. Obviously, the city, in terms of population and projects that affect the city, are really important, so they have to have a voice. Yes. So that's why saying maybe we would do it in a smaller basis, dealing and discussing that, and see if there are suggestions that we can come up with that are agreeable to everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
Since I'm new to this board, but is there been a lot of problems meeting quorum?
Not recently.
It's a- right.
Years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before this attendance policy, there were, but just so you know, Representative, that there's been a lot of other, there's been many discussions regarding the size and the composition of this. We have one of the largest boards in the state of Texas, and so it can sometimes affect governance and you know, and other things as it pertains to that.
Thank you.
Can I also chime in, because I think the quorum is one issue, Representative, but I think the other broader issue that has been trying to be resolved through attendance policies and other things, training requirements, is active involvement of the members that are here. And I'm as guilty as anyone else. Is, you know, I'll watch how Walter votes on something because he's smarter than I am, and so that kind of thing. But I think when we've instituted these policies, it's encouraged a lot of us to do a deeper dive on this and to get a little bit more engaged on the issues. Not that, you know, certainly have a long way to go, but that's been part of the purpose as well, not just on the quorum side, but active engagement. So the more, and I will say, I don't know that we've had a more actively engaged board than we have now. This is it is a good, while that always creates longer conversations at this table, and maybe that's not the best thing on some Fridays, I think that ultimately that's a win for us as a region if we are trying to dive in and get a little bit deeper knowledge on these issues. So anything we can do that adjusts our ability to take the actions that we need to take to make sure we're not falling into, you know, kind of traps that are out there as we go through any process, but also encouraging a much more actively engaged and involved board. This should be our kind of our dual goals in any policy that we set forward.
And I might just say that this isn't an impossibility. And case in fact is the metropolitan area of Phoenix. There must be 50 small communities surrounding Phoenix. They're all represented on the board. They have a very similar board, but it's like 10 people. But everybody seems like that they are represented there. They seem to do a very good job with their transportation. So this isn't an impossibility. We can figure this out. It's just going to take some effort on our part.
And I think, you know, perhaps maybe again there could be small steps that could lead to broader reform. You know, maybe starting to look at the state delegation, but also keep in mind, you know, we also have members from the New Mexico delegation. I think we're supposed to have a state senator and a representative, and they're not here, but yet they count for quorum purposes. And again, that's, you know, and then I know it's also harder for some of the smaller municipalities. I think the mayor of Clint, I think, has already also lost voting privileges as well. So, but yet it's still counting for quorum purposes. And so.
Recommendation, I know that state is considering when there's some other committees are having problems, tele meetings, like allowing for you to be present if you're on the screen kind of thing. I don't know if that's something that we could consider as a committee, but for New Mexico specifically, when the New Mexico senator was here, he talked about how hard it was for him to get here. That might be something to consider if you're more than 100 miles away or 50 miles away, you can do a tele thing.
Yeah. And the Texas Open Meetings Act does allow for that. Actually, I was in San Antonio 2 weeks ago, and for the first time at Commissioner's Court, I was able to conference in. It's just there's just certain reporting requirements on the agenda.
Just maybe something for consideration.
Not every committee in the state of Texas, Mr. Chairman, allows that. Secret doesn't allow. I can't call into secret. I got to be there.
Oh, really?
So it's not.
But I think we changed the laws during this legislative session for that action.
For like governing bodies?
Not secret.
Okay.
I wish.
Well.
Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas.
Oh, yeah, no, but I think for governmental bodies, it's certainly permitted. For purposes of this, I just want to say, this was just an update. Just to let you know that in July, in July, we hope to bring forth the items specified with the attendance policy and the committee structure, and some of the other items that the EC committee has not yet discussed.
Mr. Chair, can I just clarify? So right now, there are two items specifically that the executive committee has been looking at, which is the attendance policy and the committees. As far in terms of timing, The July meeting is the business meeting where we have a change of chair and the vice chair for the policy board. So I think we definitely would like to have the changes related to the committee structure, and if it is approved that the TPB chair and vice chair become the chair and vice chair of the executive committee. Those for sure. The attendance policy and any other changes that to the bylaws, those can wait a little more, given that the attendance policy goes with the fiscal year of the MPO. In other words, the absences count or go with the fiscal year, and the fiscal year starts in October. So we have a little more time to do that. So even though we would like to have all the changes to the bylaws done all at once, but perhaps we can move forward with the committees, the changes directly related to the committees, and then, given that the executive committee already has the authority to look at bylaws in general, go back and revisit that and take a little more time to discuss that.
Well, I think the goal was, hopefully, I guess it'll depend on the EC's availability, because they would have to set a special meeting 1 week before the normal. But one of the goals was just to present, one package to the TPB, because it's not, I don't think it's good practice to be amending the bylaws, very often. And so, I think that's the goal too, is to kind of provide one package that the TPB can vote on, and hopefully that we can achieve that by July. That's all. It's just a report.
Well, I do want to echo what was the sentiment earlier about the appreciation for the hard work and the dedication the EC has submitted to this. I know these are touchy subjects, and I appreciate the coming forward with this measured approach to getting things accomplished. So thank you. So then that'll put us on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 8, Regional Mobility Strategy.
Eddie Valtier, Texas Department of Transportation. So a few years ago, we were in touch with one of our consultants, and what we noticed at TxDOT is that we had a lot of projects underway. We've been trying to get to be more proactive than reactive, and so we started doing a lot of corridor studies, targeting corridors. So in that, we just realized we had a lot of things going on, and we came up with this idea of talking to everybody to find out what everybody else is doing, to all the other agencies, to stakeholders around the region. So TxDOT has our things that we're looking at, and we're going full steam. But sometimes we need to just kind of step back and find out what's going on with everybody else that we partner with. So what happened is it evolved into this regional mobility strategy, which we tasked our consultant. Eduardo was back with them when this started. And so what we wanted to do was capture everything from all the stakeholders in the region that we could get with, and with a lot of the agencies here, and try to come up with some type of common vision. We obviously have a lot of things in common, yet we all sometimes go in our different directions. So this was an attempt here to look at what are the priorities, what are the next big things coming to El Paso, what's important to all of us as a region, rather than going at it alone. So with that, I'm going to pass that over to Eduardo, and he's going to go over a presentation on what we've done to date.
Thank you, Mr. Valtier. For the record, Eduardo Calvo, Executive Director of the MPO. So yeah, as Mr. Valtier described, this idea, we came up with this about a year and a half ago, and it really was in response to conversations with different groups in the community, the private sector, the chamber, and some other folks about a perceived lack of leadership, lack of knowledge of what is, where are we going as a region. So more as a lack of a true mission or vision statement. So we came up with this idea of RMS, and we're going to go through this. And then at the end, you will see how this is going to be transitioning into the future work for the MPO. We should say that from day one, when this was conceived, it was always thought that at some point this work would be turned over to the MPO so that individual ideas, concepts could be translated into formal projects that would go into the MPO process for further development and hopefully implementation. So what is RMS? As we said, it was a response to a perceived lack of vision and leadership in the region. Some of the elements of RMS, we started with getting into researching all of the existing plans, multiple plans and programs that different entities had, ranging from the private sector, the public sector. We're looking obviously at not just in Texas, but obviously in New Mexico, and also looking at what's going on south of the border in Ciudad Juarez. I mean, for us here north of the border, what happens south of the border definitely has a big impact on what we do. Looking at multi-agency, federal agencies, state, the MPO, cities, counties. So that was really the starting point. Another big element of RMS was the stakeholder engagement, what we called listening sessions. We had many sessions with several of you all, but again, we included people also from the private sector, the Borderplex Alliance, for example, that covers the whole region, academics with UTEP, the Hunt Institute, and certainly with several elected officials. And again, we covered Texas, New Mexico, and Chihuahua, as you see there. Right now, we are up to about 20 listening sessions. We had to put some fixed amount of sessions because of budget considerations, and we're up to 30. I believe we have room to do about 10 more that to complete the up to 30.
Looking at the stakeholders, did you, I don't know if you just left them out or whether you're still contemplating doing it, but I don't see community-based organizations on there. I mean, you got the chambers, the Borderplex Alliance, that's important, but seniors, for example, that have an interest in transportation issues, other groups that, the cycling community that we hear about from time to time. But are we contemplating expanding the input to more grassroots type folks?
The answer is yes. I mean, at some point, especially at the very beginning, we only started with up to 20 sessions, again, because of budget. But the whole idea is to start getting a broad vision of what where the region needs to go. But at the second stage, or the second tier, we definitely want to include the groups that are not that haven't been considered in the first phase. Now, we haven't done any formal public involvement or getting to the level of neighborhood associations and all that, but again, this is not we did not intend to cover everybody in this vision. Now, as we start moving projects and or incorporating projects into the MPO process, that's a different story. Then we certainly have to follow all the public involvement and public engagement processes.
And that, but in terms of developing a vision, which is the strategy, which this is all about, it seems to me we need to expand the stakeholders to include people down in the Lower Valley, other parts of the county that have an interest in how we develop our transportation infrastructure for the future.
We definitely will take that into consideration, Senator, as to make sure that we incorporate, as broad a base as we can.
All right, thank you.
All right, so some of the major themes that we've gotten from the listening sessions, again, leadership. There's a lot of concern about economic development, traffic flow, connectivity, and so on. I mean, it's not a big surprise. But the question really is in how to translate all of these concerns and thoughts into real actions. Now, at the same time that as we conducted the listening sessions, we did some specific analysis looking at, because again, this has to be a multimodal effort. So looking at what's going on in terms of transit, looking at Sun Metro's strategic plan, and certainly now that the county has completed their regional transit study, make sure that we understand what that entails. It's a very important piece of the puzzle as well. And looking again for potential opportunities for expansion and new services throughout the region. We also looked at all the bicycle and pedestrian plans that are currently in place. We're, of course, finding a lot of challenges like, Scott mentions almost at every meeting here. There's a lot of gaps, but also a lot of opportunities where we need to improve the bike and ped facilities. We're also looking at freight rail. As far as one of the concerns that we heard is that El Paso needs to become or continue being a very important trade hub, not just for east-west travel, but also for north-south. We have a very inefficient rail crossing today for freight rail that goes through the metropolitan areas of Juarez and El Paso. So there's some studies out there to look at the building a bypass for freight rail that would go through the state of New Mexico and eliminating a lot of the current issues that we have between freight rail operations and the communities. So again, looking at both the BNSF corridor and the Union Pacific corridors. Cross-border analysis. Again, as we said before, it is very important to understand what's going on south of the border because it affects us directly in terms of the planning of our transportation facilities. And also what RMS comes up with will be definitely supporting the Texas-Mexico border master plan that you're going to hear about a little bit later, as well as a New Mexico-Chihuahua border master plan. And then certainly the highway analysis element. We've been looking at, through RMS, at some outside-of-the-box type of initiatives or concepts, but also very importantly, as part of the listening sessions, clearly there is a lot of conversation right now about 4 highway projects that you see there on the map. The Borderland Expressway, which is a combination of the Northeast Parkway in Texas plus the improvements in New Mexico to create that bypass through the Anthony Gap. Improvements on I-10 and Aircraft, a very important bottleneck that we have right now leading to the state of New Mexico connecting to the UP facility and Santa Teresa Port of Entry. And also 2 very important segments of I-10 that are being identified as part of the study that TxDOT is doing, the Reimagine I-10. Segment 2 includes the piece in downtown El Paso, which is definitely in serious need of reconstruction. And segment 3, which is roughly from the Spaghetti Bowl to Loop 375. Those 2 still need to be worked on a little more by TxDOT to make sure that we understand what the project is. Right now there's not too much detail on it, but those 4 projects have been identified also by the city of El Paso. The resolution was passed as priority projects. So there's a lot of chatter, a lot of conversations about these projects. These are definitely very important projects, but they need to be incorporated into the MPO discussion. As a policy board, you guys haven't really talked about that, so we're bringing these projects as well to initiate the conversation. So what's next? As TxDOT and the consultant team and now the MPO assisting in developing this, well, we certainly have to look outside of the box, looking for big opportunities as well, sort of like a 50,000-foot view. But little by little, we really have to go in and start identifying, what are some of the projects that need to go into the pipeline for development. Very important. RMS will inform the MPO process. Like I said before, that was the initial idea that at some point all of this would be turned over to the MPO for implementation of the development of long-range plan and identifying projects for implementation and development. So, and this ties into the next item, Mr. Chair. So, we're taking 8 and 9 together. So it's really, RMS will be also helping the board to establish the new priorities. The 4 projects that we talked about, will clearly be on that list for discussion. But whatever comes out of this, to me it is so important that, first of all, as a board and as a region, we come up with very well-defined priorities, especially when we go out and look for funding outside of the region, whether it's the Texas Transportation Commission or the legislature, Congress, whatever it is. We need to have well-defined priorities and speak with one voice. We definitely need to do that. So, and all the key players need to buy into the same plan, whatever that plan turns out to be, whether it's the MPO, the DOTs, the RMA, the El Paso Mobility Coalition, and by the way, we have a representative here from the coalition, the city of El Paso and other municipalities and other interest groups. So one voice is so important for us to make sure that we speak when we leave the region. We also need to look at the logical sequencing of projects. We don't need funding for all projects at the same time. Projects are, some are low term, medium term, and so on. They have different lead times for development. Not all of them are ready today. They're going to take some time. So we have to come up with a really intelligent, combination of projects, but also through time, come up with an implementation plan through time that allows us also to develop a sound financial strategy. So we need to look at all the possible sources of funding, federal, state, and important also to show a lot of a local skin in the game. That's very important, especially for the TxDOT Commission. Looking, again, for public-private partnerships. So with that, specifically for RMS, the final report of RMS itself will be done by the end of September. But again, to me, the most important part of RMS is that it's really feeding into the MPO process, which is an ongoing process. And, we're going to be reporting to you while doing a lot of work as, staff, and then reporting to the Technical Advisory Committee and to the Policy Board as we move forward. So with that, that's the contact information for Thelma, who's now the TxDOT project manager, myself as the MPO, and HNTV, Kelvin Craker, the PM. So with that, I'm open to any questions you have.
Any questions from the board at this point for items 8 and 9?
Correct.
I know there is a public comment.
Mr. Scott White?
Morning again. Scott White, El Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. And I've said this before a few times. Some of you have been here on the board when I've said it. Some of you haven't. It's been over a several-year process when I've been saying this. We need, for this region, an overarching vision, an overarching policy that should guide this board. Not just simply in terms of one project after another, but how do we achieve that vision to make sure we reach the transportation needs of this community? As projects come forward, we keep changing what our needs are, what our priorities are. We become reactive as a region and as a body here to the never-ending list of projects. To get ahead of that, we need to go even beyond what this RMS says. We need, for you, as the policy board, to set the policy vision. What do we want as a region? You as the leaders, as the voice, what is it we need for this region? If you want one voice, you are that voice. But you need to use it. You need to sit down and say, we don't need to address every single project in the same way we have before. And I know why it happens. It's because you have to have your TIP and your STIP and all these other project lists. But you need to think bigger. More than the 50,000, you need to think, how do we serve this entire region from top to bottom? How do we meet the transportation needs of every person in this region? Not just business interests, not just community interests, as Senator Rodriguez said, not even the neighborhood interest. From top to bottom, all the way up and down, every mode of transportation. You can sit down. You can set the process and say, we want this as our goal, so that in 2050, this is what our projects are looking like. So they shape those projects. They give reason to those projects. It's not simply somebody says, we need a bigger, wider road, or we need a hike-bike path. It's how do these projects add to that quality of life for our region and truly address our transportation issues. I say this to you in all seriousness. This is what you could be doing to truly shape this entire region and make it possible that our transportation policies aren't just about road projects, but it's about the quality of life. It's about land use planning. We need to expand who you talk to, because transportation projects do impact our land use planning. They do impact the basic decisions people make when they get up in the morning and say, how am I going to get to the work? I thank you for your time.
Is there additional comments?
No.
Any other discussion by the board? Seeing none, move on to item number 10. Call for projects for the El Paso MPO Transportation Alternative Set Aside Funds for the Texas portion of the El Paso MPO planning area.
Brian Miskimen, El Paso MPO. We just opened up the call for projects for the Transportation Alternative Set Aside Program for fiscal years 2020 through 2022. It opened on June 17, 2019, and will close on August 23, 2019. For federal fiscal year 2020, we have $1,440,075 available. Fiscal year 21 and 22, we have $1,400,000 for each year. The TA set aside provides funding for projects and activities defined as transportation alternatives, including on and off-road pedestrian and bike facilities, infrastructure projects for improving non-driver access to public transportation and enhanced mobility, community improvement activities, and environmental mitigation, trails that serve a transportation purpose, and safe routes to school projects. And I'll be the point of contact for this project call, so if anyone has any questions or comments.
Any questions from the board, comments?
So that reference to trails that serve a transportation purpose, the earlier presentation that we heard today, would that be eligible for funding?
Correct, yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Item number 11, call for projects for Surface Transportation Program, Large Urban and Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Mandatory Funds for the New Mexico portion of the El Paso MPO planning area.
Again, Brian Miskimen, El Paso MPO. The calls for fiscal year 2020 for CMAQ mandatory and STP large urban call for projects. It opened up on June 5th, 2019 and will close July 26, 2019. The available CMAQ mandatory funding is $1,226,013, and the available STP large urban is $875,648. Any questions, comments?
Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 12, Texas-Mexico Border Transportation Master Plan.
Good morning, Transportation Policy Board members. I'm Tim Waters with TxDOT's Transportation Planning and Programming Division out of Austin, and I serve as the Manager for International Trade and Border Planning for TxDOT, and will also serve as the Project Manager for what is the development of the Texas-Mexico Border Transportation Master Plan. To give you a little background information as to what the Border Master Plan is, it is a product based on a memorandum of agreement between the U.S. and Mexican governments. So U.S. State Department as well as U.S. Department of Transportation has a memorandum of agreement with Mexico's Secretaría of Comunicaciones y Transportes y Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores that the southern states of the U.S. will join together with the Mexican northern states to form what is known as the U.S.-Mexico Joint Working Committee. Out of this Joint Working Committee, the agreement is that all the states will look at planning, programming, coordination of ports of entry, as well as data sharing, and really serve as a forum of communication as to what the investment infrastructure looks like on the Mexican side and coordinate those activities between the U.S. side. So the Texas-Mexico Border Transportation Master Plan is an update from plans that were created by TxDOT in cooperation with the local governments back in 2012 and 2013. At that time, we actually had 3 regional plans. One was for El Paso, Ciudad Juarez in the state of Chihuahua. We also had for Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, and then for the Rio Grande Valley in the state of Tamaulipas. With much input, including those regionally here from the El Paso region, the state opted to go with one border master plan to account for El Paso Ciudad Juarez to the port of Brownsville, since we are one state with one border and looking at connectivity, not only going north and south, but east and west. So our focus for Border Master Plan is really a binational, multimodal effort that is looking at connectivity of the entire transportation network system at the 28 ports of entry. So we will not only look at highway, but we will look at rail, we will look at pipeline, we will look at air, we will look at bicycle, we will look at pedestrian and transit. And then in addition of how the various modes connect intermodally from one to each other. There are 5 spheres of influence that the Border Master Plan will review and take into account. The first sphere is 60 miles both north and south of the border. Once again, this is binationally. Sphere 2 is the key population centers and manufacturing centers. So it will take into account the energy sector in Eagle Ford within the Midland Odessa region, to San Antonio, where we have the inland port of San Antonio as well as the Toyota manufacturing plant, and then to the port of Corpus Christi, where we have a lot of the energy byproducts being shipped out internationally. It will also cover the manufacturing area of Monterrey, to give you an example what that Sphere 2 looks like. Sphere 3 will take into account the 5 border states, not only the state of Texas, but Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo Laredo, and Tamaulipas. Sphere 4 will look at how U.S. and Mexico interact with each other. And then Sphere 5 will take into account what is known as the USMCA, or the old NAFTA agreement. There are essentially 4 phases, and our approach is how we will develop the Border Master Plan. Currently, we are between phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was the introduction of the study itself. Phase 3 goes into data collection. And our data collection, which I will discuss further in detail, talks about receiving information from the local governments, including the MPO. Up to date, we have held 2 actual rounds of public meetings, not only for the stakeholders, public and private, but also public meetings, and then as well as 2 meetings for what is known as binational regional steering committees, which are made of representatives of the local governments and both private sector from Ciudad Juarez and Chihuahua and El Paso, Dona Ana County. Many of you and some of your members are members of the Binational Regional Steering Committee, and we're very honored to have Commissioner Bettis serve as the co-chair for the El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua BNRSC. You can see what the timelines are regarding each of the 4 phases. But once again, this gives you a very high-level 30,000-foot overview of our development. So stakeholder engagement has been and will continue to be a very key element associated with the development of Border Master Plan. So as I noted, in round 1, we actually had a coming together of what's been known or coined as the Binational Regional Steering Committee. We've also have held public meetings as well as stakeholder meetings, both on the public and private sector. You can see that in El Paso, we were here on April 29th and April 30th. But we are looking at Border Master Plan, still keeping the concept of the 3 regions, but then bringing those 3 regions together into one actual plan. So what did we get out of from the initial meetings that we have held? So you can tell in the El Paso region, one of the comments raised consistently from all of the meetings has been just the consistent border crossing time. The wait time that is associated with the movement of not only goods, but people as well. We were noted based on public meetings about the heavy student usage of them crossing through the border, most likely as a pedestrian, and then their connectivity to another mode, be it through bicycle or be it through transit or some other avenue. And then we noted that we needed to have a connectivity or cooperative effort with the Mexican side. And then, of course, security was an actual issue or challenge raised not only in El Paso, but for Rio Grande Valley and Laredo as well. But as part of the issues and challenges, there were some truly noted opportunities there that many of the stakeholders at the meeting wanted us to take into account. And use of technology was one of those, to ensure that there was a lot of information sharing from the private sector to the public sector. A good example is that what bridges were having the least amount of crossing time, so that then a decision could be made as to which POE to utilize. There was also the need to identify amenities for those who were utilizing the bicycle or pedestrian mode, such as canopies, such as a dedicated lane to those, so that the crossing could be a lot faster or efficient. And then something that was noted as interest within this region was the separation of truck lanes, having dedicated truck lanes to personally owned vehicle lanes to help expedite that movement of goods as well. So part of the effort is to identify goals and objectives for the Border Master Plan to ensure that TxDOT has a vision and mission that meets the needs of all the local governments, not only within themselves, but as the region as well. You can kind of see what the proposed vision and mission is here. Through the El Paso MPO, you have the opportunity to comment upon that. We would ask that you would, if you do have comments, send those to Mr. Calvo so that he can then forward them to our office. But these are very preliminary. In round 2, which were held about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we actually introduced it to the El Paso Binational Regional Steering Committee, where we continue to receive comments from them. So you have, as a draft form, the identified goals. These have come from previous plans that have been either developed here regionally, such as the MPO's 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or even TxDOT's strategic plan or our statewide plan. So these kind of identify what those goals are and then what the intent of the goal is. So then we will have the opportunity to identify objectives on how we actually will measure or meet those goals. So in round 1, as you can tell, the common theme for each of the 3 regions, their number 1 goal was having mobility and reliability. That came to the top for all the 3 regions. What also came to the top as the number 2 goal was economic competitiveness. So the 3 regions are really in sync with each other. The only anomaly was within the Rio Grande Valley, where they looked at multimodal connectivity as being a tie as part of that second goal. So as I noted, we're in the phase right now of data collection. And so really what we are trying to do is develop a binational and multimodal data inventory for the entire border region. This has never been done before. That we're going to account for data components as well as information that's available not only from El Paso to the Port of Brownsville. And then we're going to share this with all the participants and make it available because we want to be as transparent as possible. One of the things that we identified as part of the public meetings is that a representative representing the Economic Development Corporation of a city noted that now they got the opportunity to view what other data the other EDCs are collecting so that they can take that into account and be competitive for their respective region. And so we found that, though it wasn't considered as our efforts, we considered that to be a good byproduct of us collecting this data. We're going to, as part of this process, identify data gaps and then strategies and methodologies to then go and fill in those gaps. Our approach to doing that will then come back to the regions for your input to ensure that we're taking into account not only what your perspective is on addressing those data gaps, but then sharing that methodology that if you experience gaps within your region, how you can utilize this consistent methodology approach. The data is going to be helpful in allowing us to identify performance metrics, not only for the plan, but for each of the 28 ports of entry and then the mode that is being utilized within the respective regions as well. And then, as I noted, this is really going to be a true clearinghouse of all the data that's being collected throughout the entire border. So the data sources that we're relying upon the local governments to provide, as well as the MPO, includes transportation plans and studies that the governing bodies have approved of within their respective government. So you heard about the regional mobility strategy, the RMS that was addressed earlier. It also takes into account the MPO's 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. We are going to incorporate that information as long as it is readily available to us. In addition to that, we want to take into account and identify not only the plans and studies, but also quantitative and qualitative data. We want to look at statistical information. Earlier it was mentioned about land use. We not only want to observe what the land use is today, but what the future land use is as well. Because in transportation, depending on how the land use is being applied, it has different effects on transportation, on trips, and the actual network system itself. And then we also going to be doing a collection of surveys by focus groups, primarily within the private sector. We need to get information from the Class 1 railroads. We need to get information from the maquiladores and the manufacturers. Up to now, we've collected over 300 data sources on our own. This is just what TxDOT and the consultant team has done. You can tell the focus based on the chart to the left, 50% has been based on road. Multiple uses, meaning multiple modes, is about 20%. We'll note that transit is very low at 2%. On where we are collecting the data, over 50% has been from the Texas U.S. side, with Mexico providing about 37%. And part of our efforts in the data collection is to ensure that those percentage points go up, particularly in the mode, but also are evenly distributed between Texas and Mexico. Okay. So one of the efforts as part of this process in the data collection is that we're going to open up this data questionnaire, make it available to all the local governments as well as the private sectors. Our anticipation is by the end of next week, we should be able to share this through a link that would allow any of the parties to then go and put in their information. So one of the key aspects of Border Master Plan is the identification, designation of what is being coined as international trade corridors. As part of the development of the Border Master Plan, in agreement of what we have between the U.S. and state, federal and state agencies, as well as the Mexican government, is that if you have a project that you want to implement within your region and it has not been included or identified within the Border Master Plan, and you are seeking a federal or state action, that project cannot go forward. Because Border Master Plan will essentially be utilized as the master plan, therefore coined, to receive that federal action and going forward with that development. Yes, sir.
Say that again, please.
Okay.
What kind of project?
So if you are seeking a federal or state action, and by that we mean federal funding, from Federal Railroad, from Federal Highway Administration, from Federal Transit Administration, from Federal Motor Carrier, from US EPA, if you are seeking an action from them or from the state government, such as Department of Agriculture, TxDOT, if you are seeking federal or state funds or whatever the case may be, if that project has been identified to be in alignment with these designated international trade corridors, you're not going to be able to get that action if we haven't been able to identify it with your cooperation in being in the Border Master Plan.
So even though we would have it go through the MPO process, this is another step that nearly any project in our region because by your definition would affect the trade corridor. So nearly any project in our region would also have to have approval on this plan. So or entered into this plan. This is another step that we will have to make.
It would need to be
vetted by them.
Yes, not necessarily vetted. It would just need to be incorporated and identified. And we have been working with the El Paso MPO and a lot of the local governments to, one, ensure that that message is provided to the regions, but that you also assist us in helping identify how that process and what those projects look like.
You can see my concern is it's already extremely difficult to get things on the appropriate plans in time, get the funding in line, and now here's another step that we have to jump through.
Well,
because we're on the border, I guess.
Well, and it was what the requirements of developing border master plans from the U.S.-Mexico Joint Working Committee is to ensure that we have projects that are being developed, that are being invested on both sides of the border. We want to make sure that as local governments are making investments on the Texas-U.S. side, that we have connectivity to those port of entries, to those highway corridors, that they connect somewhere on the Mexican side as well. And there's been many examples throughout the border region, not only in Texas, and where the local government's working with the Texas side has put an investment in, pretty costly investment, and we didn't have the Mexican side, for whatever reason, put in either in a timely basis or not at all their investment.
Okay, so this would mean more direct border effect, not ancillary effect.
Right, and if I may, what is very obvious, for example, if you're looking for an action like a new port of entry, right? That if that new port of entry is not identified in the border master plan, whether it's in Texas or New Mexico or wherever, the binational committees are not even going to look at it. Now, when it comes to projects that feed into existing or future ports of entry, then that would be very helpful to have in the border master plan, because in addition to being a project that serves for example, the MPO region, it serves a binational corridor as well. So there will be projects that need to be on both, right?
But not necessarily all projects.
Not necessarily all projects. One of the key components here is that when we identify these international trade corridors with the local government's assistance, both at a primary, secondary, and tertiary level, we're also then at some point going to identify what are the commitments by the local governments to implement that project. And then it's going to help us identify where the gaps are in the system. And it's going to help us identify what the cost of investment to fill in that gap. And then part of the implementation plan is then go identify the necessary financial assistance to help fill in that gap. Because what we're trying to do is, one, we're trying to tell the border story. We're trying to tell about what the need of an $1 investment in the border, what that means from an economic component of how critical it is, not only to the border region, but the economy of the state of Texas and the economy of the U.S. government. So that essentially, as policymakers, you can then go and take this document that is truly data-driven, then to go potentially note what your story is and how the need for an investment into Loop 375 or IH-10 or an actual port of entry, how that helps the economy locally and how that helps the economy of the state and then the nation as a whole, to then advocate for the need for additional funds.
Does that answer your question?
Well, you can see where I'm going with this. I have some concerns about, is this going to add I understand the need, but is this going to add another level of bureaucracy on just little projects that we're trying to get done that happen to be within 10 miles of a border crossing? Because by your definition,
No, not as a secondary approval process and not for something within 10 miles away from an actual designated international trade corridor. But if you are seeking assistance in the development of an EDC area, expansion of an industrial park, your location of that industrial park to a designated international trade corridor at any level, this will definitely assist and enhance that particular need.
And-
Because we're trying to ensure that the region remains economically competitive, not only within the region, but in comparison to other regions and then the state as a whole.
And if I may, that is a key, that look at it more as an opportunity, not so much as an additional, requirement of bureaucracy, although we love bureaucracy, right? But it's more of an opportunity. For example, if there is a project that's identified in the MPO plan, an improvement to, Loop 375 or US 50, whatever it is, that's already in the plan. But if that project is part, and we can show that it becomes part of an international corridor, then that helps us. That helps that project because now it has, more international significance, and it may be, it will help us in terms of funding opportunities and all that.
So at what point would that particular project be recognized under this plan? So how often is this plan gonna be
Right.
updated,
Very good, yeah.
and when, how often can you add new projects to this plan?
So our goal is to update the plan on a 5-year cycle. It falls in line in what we did in 2012 and 2013 because we initiated this effort in the fall of 2018. The approach we're taking regarding border master plan is really identifying low-hanging fruit, those investments that we can go ahead and implement already to help the efficient movement of people and good, regardless if it's a policy, program, or project aspect. In addition, we're going to take these identified corridors with these identified investments with your assistance here regionally through the Binational Regional Steering Committee to come up with a prioritized list of projects on a short, medium, and long-term aspect. And it's going to take into account what investment you as the MPO, the county, or the city already have planned for that. It may, for just an example, it may be only for 7 or 10 miles. But if it's identified as a prioritized project and needed money has to come from the state or the federal government, then that identifies it as a priority, and then we would go back and highlight financial aspects to fill in that gap. So you would then get a project that is 15 or 20 or much longer than what you had originally anticipated. That really is the goal. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, here is what the local governments are investing now. Here's really what's needed to maintain the economic competitive as a region and for the state. And so then as policymakers, not through TxDOT, but you locally, how would you go address that either through any of the delegations, both at the state or federal level? So it really is another tool.
So if we used Tornillo as an example, and we had been under that master plan, would that have been a totally different situation as to what happened eventually or the outcome of that port?
And Judge, in our estimation, yes, because we would have ensured not only through the border master plan, but some agreement with SET and SRE, the need to have the Mexican government through Banobras or other financial institute in the Mexican side to make that commitment on their end.
I agree.
Okay. So, I'm sorry.
Two quick questions. One is, so you're not going to incorporate our MTP into your border plan, but are you going to comment on our projects?
So we
in
will
our MTP so we can react to that?
So we will incorporate the MTP as approved by the policy board into the border master plan. That's seamless because as I noted, and let me make it clear, whatever information has been approved by the local government entity, which the MPO is considered one as well, as long as it's submitted to us we will incorporate that into the plan. As is. Regarding the project prioritization, we really haven't worked out that approach or process yet, because we really want to take this in steps as part of each of the phases. And the first phase is to ensure, and I'll touch on that in a minute, is to ensure that we have the primary, secondary, and tertiary transportation network systems based on your input. Once those have been truly vetted, then the next step is doing the analytics as to what are the issues for the corridor. How do we go and address any type of aspect, for example, congestion, reduction in border wait time, multimodal connectivity. There's a whole lot of aspects associated with that. And then it's really identifying what is the key effort to address that particular concern. And if it's project, if it's funding, if it's just a policy aspect, then we will address it in that regard as well. And so I want to note it's very iterative, but we're not moving forward without the Binational Regional Steering Committee, which many of you are representatives to that and have attended our meetings, are a component of.
Okay, so then my second question is, in our MTP, we have, for example, we have a Phase 2 streetcar project, planning study. So is that an opportunity to get funding from TxDOT if it's in this border plan to help do that study and analyze that corridor from downtown, let's say, to MCA?
You have coined it exactly right. It is an opportunity for us to do additional analysis from a different type of mode and look at the connectivity of that mode to other modes, and then identify from an analytics perspective the ranking of where it would lie, taking into the entire transportation network system. Also allowing us working with the local government to identify what the funding needs are, and then what is the best approach to go and seek that funding need. It may not necessarily be from the state, but it opens up the opportunity that the local government may not have, but that we will have in our end to say, okay, here are some options for you. Here are the scenarios with those options. What works best for the region? That's what we're identifying, including as part of this border master plan.
To clarify, you said, you just told Mr. Bonajic that whatever we submit will be included in the plan. Who is you? Who can do that? Can an EDC do that? Can a municipality do that? All of the above? What is the qualifier to be able to submit a project?
All of the above can submit the information. What we are asking for, though, is to ensure that that entity that has the ability to bring local funding to that project will help escalate it, will help identify it as part of that methodology we'll develop with your assistance in the prioritization. It has been very clear, at least from the Texas Transportation Commission, that they are seeking local governments to participate in the effort as we go forward with project development. The Commission has, in many instances, have been willing to fill in that gap, as long as the local government has been willing to do their share as well. None of those policies or requirements by our Commission goes away, but it does allow us through the Board of Trade Advisory Committee, which is a legislatively mandated committee on TxDOT working with the Secretary of State, to make this recommendation of prioritized projects of the Border Master Plan for Commission consideration.
Okay, one more question and I'll leave it alone.
Okay.
What is the deadline for project submission and that sort of thing? Because from what you're saying, we need to be in this plan, and then we have 5 years to have another shot. So when do we have to get our I guess, when do we have to get our projects to you, and how do we submit those to you?
So we haven't done a call or request for actual projects. What we have done a call or request for is data from the local governments and also their assistance to help us identify and note what these international trade corridors will be. And Mr. Miller, I think I could probably address some of those aspects if I proceed with the rest of the presentation, because we are taking this as a truly iterative approach. I can assure you, one of the things I tell my staff, and one of the things I tell the consultant on board on doing this, is don't get ahead of the binational regional steering committees nor ahead of Border Trade Advisory Committee. Because we want to, one, be able to share the information with all the local governments regionally, but then we also want to get your input and feedback. Are we going in the right direction? This is truly a partnership between TxDOT and the border region. I'm sure many of you in local and state government would attest that this is something we as a department have not done before. And so when we initially started this effort, it was very minor in scope. We were essentially following what the 3 previous border master plans did. But getting a lot of input regionally from the EPMPO, from this policy board, from the private sector, it really has expanded to be what we are presenting today. And we think it really is a great opportunity, once again, to assist the local governments in telling your border story. That really is our goal. And then the other need is to identify not only what the local governments are making from an investment effort, but what the return on that investment does. And if investment was done by other parties, what would that really mean to the economy of the region, the economy of the state, and the economy of the whole? So we'll, if I may, I'll proceed with the presentation. So this first aspect is really corridor identification and designation. We want to be able to get your information, input from you onto our interactive maps as to what those high priority corridors look like for you. That's then going to help us finalize what the goals and objectives are, not only for your region, but the border master plan as a whole, and then really set the foundation for forecasts and the economic analysis. So part of the effort is really, we're going to look at the 28 port of entries. We're going to look at the support system for those POEs. So U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. General Services Administration, as well as Mexico's Aduanas and SOT are actively engaged so that they have begun to develop what their 5-year, 10-year, 15 and 20-year plans look like for those port of entries. We're also looking at the connectivity of the transportation network system from all modes to those POEs. Some of the key efforts has really been us gathering data from the stakeholders and having discussions such as this one today, relying upon you to provide us your much needed approved data. So with your assistance, we can then go through this prioritization effort that we've been talking about. Really, we want to be able to document tools and performance measures of how we're going to not only develop Border Master Plan, but implement Border Master Plan as well. But then we want to be able to identify performance of each of the border regions and each of the 28 port of entries. How are they operating? What can be improved? What are the impedances, et cetera? And we want to look at that once again from a policy, program, and project aspect. So from a corridor needs assessment, once you assist us in identifying those international trade corridors, we're going to do exactly as we've been having this discussion on. How does that trade corridor serve and for what purpose? How is it efficiently operating throughout the corridor? And then where are the impedances, not only for the movement of goods, but people as well? And then how do we dissect and identify what those impedances are? How do we make recommendations to overcome that from a program, policy, or project aspect? And then what is the cost? And that will serve as useful information for not only TxDOT, but for the region and local governments as well. I want to go back because, as you can tell, Our very high-level effort is really from a planning perspective. With your assistance, you're going to help us define these designation of what the corridors are. You're going to assist us to describe them, and then we'll report that out to you and many others as we go forward with the next aspect of needs assessment. So really, part of our preliminary inventory of the binational infrastructure has been from these plans that have been adopted by TxDOT and many others. Many of you are familiar with Texas's freight mobility plan that was adopted by the Commission in December of 2018. You'll note that we have provided to the legislature 2 reports, the first report being the identification of international trade corridors, as well as what's known as the Border Trade Activities Report, which are actual investment that TxDOT has made or will make. And then we're building off of the 2012-2013 Border Master Plans. We are looking at it from a layered multimodal approach, as you see there and as I have discussed. So for the El Paso region, these are these multimodal corridors that we have identified initially. And they take into account what we are identifying as primary corridors. So you'll see Interstate 10 and Interstate 20. You'll also see as what's been referred to as improvements to the US 67 corridor through Ojinaga Presidio. What you won't see is Border Highway West, or Loop 375, or Zaragoza, or even the connectivity of the outer corridor in Mexico to Guadalupe Tornillo. And the reason why you won't see those is because we are truly seeking input from the local governments to help us identify that. Maybe 375 serves as a primary corridor, maybe it's considered locally as a secondary corridor. Once again, we didn't want to get ahead of the regions. We just only wanted to address what we identified as the interstate system or the emerging corridors. So please don't be alarmed as if your particular hazmat corridor or your particular outer loop is not in here. We really are seeking the local governments to help us define what those are. And then not only on the El Paso, Dona Ana, Texas, New Mexico side, but also for Ciudad Juarez and the state of Chihuahua. In addition, we are looking at all modes. So here you see the Class 1 railroads coming through the actual port of entry here within El Paso. We had discussion about railroad investment earlier, but this takes into account some of the identified information that we are looking at. And not only are we taking into account the Class 1s, but we're also looking at the what's been referred to as the short lines or first mile, last mile railroads. This takes into account the airports within the El Paso, Ciudad Juarez region, and their connectivity is how they play a very vibrant and important part to the port of entry. And then these are the identified pipelines coming through your region. We want to be able to note, especially as energy sector plays a key role in Eagle Ford or West Texas, and then as Mexico, since they have opened their exploration rights to the northern sector of the country, what those potential impacts look like not only for the northern states, but for Texas as a whole. So where do we go next? One, part of our request here today is getting your data and having your respective entity provide us that data. Once we get it, we're going to outline where any gaps are and the approach then to filling in those gaps. We would like your assistance in helping us identify these corridors so then we can start prioritizing them with your assistance when we come back on the next rounds of meetings as to what those look like based on input provided to us regionally and locally. And then we're going to continue to refine not only the goals, but the objectives of how we meet those goals. We anticipate that the Border Trade Advisory Committee will meet sometime in August or September. That's a floating date right now. Commissioner Perez, Mr. Calvo, and other areas from the region are actual members to BTAC. But then we plan on coming back in the week of October, the third week of October, to hold the next rounds of meetings. It's going to be the Binational Regional Steering Committee. We also will hold around the public meetings, and then we also will hold private stakeholders workshops. We're going to report out the information that has been provided to us from round 1, round 2, and through the interim of the month of June to October. We're going to provide some baseline analytics based on the information that we receive, and then we really would like to narrow down that preliminary take or input on those trade corridors and then the goals and objectives, because really they're going to be the framework that's going to help us define the metrics as we go forward. We appreciate the continued participation of various members around this table or your government entity in participating in the binational regional steering committees. This is truly a cooperative partnership. We want to make sure that we capture and that we're able to tell the border story, not only for the El Paso region, but for the entire border region from El Paso, Ciudad Juarez to the port of Brownsville. I am going to then go and provide you my information. Just to let you know, Giacomo Yaquinto, he is my border planner assigned here to the El Paso region. Due to another scheduling conflict, he could not attend, but Eduardo knows how to get both a hold of him and myself. And so I will stop there and answer any additional questions, Mr. Chair, you or board members may have.
Any questions, Judge?
Mr. Juarez, thank you for that, but I wanted to give you two practical situations and see if that sort of fits in, because I need to understand that better. I get BNSF come in and tells me they're having difficulty in crossing, and that if we were more efficient, they could increase up to 30 in personnel. That would be over 100,000. And so you just sort of sit there and you're wondering, okay, now what do I do at this point? And so I reached out, try to talk to different people, but from what I'm seeing, if I brought this to you, then you would have access to the Mexican side and have these kinds of discussions. Yeah. Would that be something that would fit into this model that you're proposing?
Yes, Judge, that is a very good example of how our office and this border master plan could address that issue. And essentially, they've identified an issue that leads to a wait time for them in crossing through that port of entry. Mm-hmm. What our plan would do is it due based on policy at the federal or state level on the U.S. or Mexican side? Is it because there's a program that is not in place that could be in place that would help that efficient movement of goods? So from a policy perspective, many of you may be aware of, based on U.S. policy, is that a Mexican engineer cannot cross that train over into the U.S.-Texas side. They must stop on the border. The U.S. engineers or Texas engineers must come over to where the bridge stops, load on the bridge, and then get clearance to come over. That's a policy aspect. Mm-hmm. And one of the efforts in working with UP and the other Class 1s is how do we go about addressing that? And we have not only the U.S. Department of Transportation on board, but also the Federal Railroad Administration as how do we best efficiently move that. Another example to address that from a program perspective is that there is an item node within CBP that is Unified Cargo Processing, where the Mexicans and U.S. side are inspecting the cargo jointly. UP and BNSF has proposed, why can't we take UCP, examine it as a business case model, and apply it to rail? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that we are looking as well. We'll take it from a business case perspective. That's the issue, doing the analytics as to the why, and then addressing it as potential options and scenarios is part of what Border Master Plan will do. Mm-hmm. We may just note the issue within BTMP, and then as a secondary element, as part of implementation of Border Master Plan, start developing these business case models associated with that.
You know, that's very comforting because such a viable request, yet I didn't have an avenue or it was confusing as to what I could do about that. And the other one, without getting too much into detail, is Tornillo. I've made a lot of effort, talked to private industry, try to talk to government, and it's just sort of unbelievable that so much money went into it, and we're like just at a standstill. And so I think that's the kind of thing that if maybe you yourself could identify with the other side, at least to get the answers, because we get about 20 different answers as to why it didn't happen.
Right.
But I don't get an answer as to why it's not going to happen.
Right.
And so maybe this is the kind of model that would help.
And Judge, that is another very good point. You, Commissioner Bettis, and many of the county staff has raised that to TxDOT as we go and develop border master plan. But more importantly, working with the TxDOT El Paso district, as we go to meetings with the Mexican government through Joint Working Committee, we bring that up as a priority for the region. Working with the Binational Bridges and Border Crossing Group, which is the entity that talks about implementation and infrastructure investment, we continue to raise the connectivity of Guadalupe, Tornillo. Border master plan efforts will try to get those commitments from the Mexican government to continue that connectivity of the outer loop in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, to that POE. So this is another opportunity to do so. And we can continue, with your consent and your coordination, continue to raise those issues to the Mexican government and to the state of Chihuahua.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Juarez, for your presentation. Regarding phase 1, phase 2, it's data collection phase. Do you use ITS systems to gather that type of data?
Yes, sir. We will incorporate that as one of the technology aspects that we talked about. We want to make sure that, for example, we have border wait time information in place not only within El Paso, but in some of the other port of entries that is identified through a border coordinated infrastructure system. Our goal as part of Border Master Plan is not only taking the data and doing the analysis associated with that, but also working with the local governments as to where the needs are for other POEs. We want to be able to identify what potential benefits exist for that border wait time technology, bringing all the systems together to talk with each other, quote unquote. But then, identifying, is it a public sector effort or is it a private sector effort? And then what guidelines would both public and private sector industries talk about for the implementation of that, and then making it readily available to the users of the system?
The reason I ask the question is because, this is so important for our region. When we go to Austin and we're fighting for resources, we have to fight as a border region for resources. My concern is that this delegation for the last 2 sessions has received significant amount of funding for ITS systems, but the city, in coordination with the delegation, has been pushing TxDOT to move forward on our ITS projects at our ports of entry. How much communication is there between the Texas Border Trade Master Plan and TxDOT on how important this stuff is?
So as part of our ongoing efforts and looking at BCIS and border wait time information and having that interactive connectivity between the two, it is a priority for the department. We are trying to identify with Border Master Plan, working with the local governments in the regions, about how we not only put in the current technology, because it's rapidly changing on us, and what we used as Bluetooth systems and some of the existing POEs is not really where the market or technology aspect is. But it's really coming up with the game plan for each of the respective regions, not only for the port of entry, but having that discussions with the transportation network system, where that if you're on the El Paso side and you're considering Zaragoza, maybe Bora, Dona Ana is the other aspect. We are looking at this from an ITS, not only by mode, but by POE as well. And we will continue to raise those to the top based on input received from the local government. But then it's also identifying a game plan from the implementation aspect and how we go about funding that through a prioritized mechanism.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mr. Wattis, I just had a quick question. We're talking about the binational rail network. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You were talking about the first mile and last mile railroad. Can you explain that to me?
So many of the class ones utilize their efforts to get movement of goods from a long perspective. So they may pick up, for example, from the port of Manzanilla, come through the port of El Paso, and then carry it on to the Midwest or the Northeast. So they are what's considered to be class one long haulers. The short lines really are those independent railroads that get it to the industrial facilities, that do that connectivity to inland or water ports. They mainly transfer in what's considered short miles. So respectively, in their own right, they are identified as short line railroads or that first mile, last mile railroad. And so I'm just using the vernacular that they themselves have come up, but it's getting it from a manufacturer distribution center to another manufacturer distribution center, that good may then take another mode to get further distributed out through the system.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
In the interest of time, I'm going to take two more questions. One from Representative Moody.
I appreciate the presentation. And to Representative Blanco's point, you said that these ITS projects are a priority of the department. Is that what you said?
Yes, we're ensuring that we have the efficient movement of people and goods, not only through the border region, but throughout the entire transportation
Okay,
system.
I just want to make sure I heard that right, because if I was judging by the forward-facing actions of the department over the last 3 years, I would assume they weren't a priority, because we've been working very hard. Mayor at the city's been working very hard to spend money. I've never had an instance in my time in the legislature where we've had more trouble spending money on a project that should be a priority, to the point where, you know, our former district engineer here was openly hostile to the ITS project, to the state senator at one of these meetings. So I'm very, very happy to hear that it is a priority, and hopefully we can now get it done.
Thank you, Representative, and I definitely will take the information back to the Austin office and convey that to the TxDOT El Paso district. But we want to make sure for the department that we have the efficient movement of goods and people throughout the transportation network system. As many of you know, the commission has identified congestion, especially within the urban areas, as one of its priorities. In addition to that, we look at investment from a prioritized perspective as to how we can improve the current transportation network system while maintaining it as well. But Representative Moody, I will definitely take your comment back to my director. And if you would like, we can kind of outline in Border Master Plan how we will address this in future presentations or discussions.
Thank you.
Comment on Representative Moody. We think the legislation that was just passed will allow us to use that ITS money appropriately, finally. But my big question is, the 800-pound gorilla is the fact that CBP is not manning the bridges. You're not going to have you're going to have continual congestion on both sides until till the immigration issue is resolved, and that's not been discussed at one time. Have I heard that once in any of this? So part of our problems are congressionally determined by the lack of personnel on the CBP bridges and the fully staffing of all lanes.
So, Mayor, it wasn't raised in my presentation. I just wanted to focus on the comments that we received from the El Paso region. But the other regions did bring up the staffing of CBP personnel at the port of entries, or the hours of operation for those POEs within their respective areas.
And you're aware that we have a public-private partnership with the city of El Paso where we're paying for certain times for overtime with CBP, although it's pretty moot right now.
Yes, sir. Our office is aware of that agreement, as many agreements exist within the POEs and the local governments to CBP. CBP is actively engaged in our members of the binational regional steering committees. They have heard the comments at all the meetings and even at our analysis of what we've heard throughout the regions. For example, in the Rio Grande Valley, the need to have an agriculture inspector at FAR is one of those issues that has to be addressed by the federal government. Part of our effort, once again, is to identify these issues and challenges and the opportunities associated with that. But we will continue to raise those concerns to all the partners, if they're at the federal or state government level, to ensure that we have a very proactive and dynamic border master plan. But thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Mr. Juarez, for your time and for answering our questions here.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Item number 13, New Mexico Chihuahua Border Master Plan update.
Good morning, buenos días. Good morning. My name is Homer Bernal. I'm with the New Mexico Department of Transportation. My presentation is regarding the New Mexico Chihuahua Border Master Plan. And as many of you are aware of, the Border Master Plans were an initiative created by the FHWA Joint Working Committee, which is a binational planning committee regarding infrastructure and transportation, projects that influence or affect border crossings and border crossing infrastructure projects. As the first slide indicates, that's our evolution. We began with this idea where binational agencies, federal, state, and local entities would come together and prioritize projects. Again, ours is the New Mexico Chihuahua Border Master Plan. A quick summary of all the border master plans that have taken place. Our New Mexico Chihuahua Border Master Plan, we actually terminated or finished that first project or plan at the end of 2015. California, Baja California, they're actually on their third update. And as you all are aware of, Texas had 3 border master plans, Arizona, Sonora. They've already completed their second one, and so forth and so on. New activities. We were able and fortunate to find funding to do an update to our border master plan. And again, our border master plan is basically the huddling, the gathering of stakeholders, federal, state, and local stakeholders to come together to the same table and share ideas as to what are the priority projects that these entities think are important to present to government agencies, planning agencies, agencies such as the MPO. We are now currently, we started our Policy Advisory Committee workshops last month. We had our first meeting. Our project is a 2-year project. And TxDOT, as you're aware of, they are consolidating their 3 border master plans into one huge border master plan that incorporates trade movement. Now, if there's any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask, throw something, or raise your hand, and I'll attend your question. Our workshops are actually, the original border master plan was divided into the policy advisory committees and our technical working committees. Now, our technical working committees were the boots on the ground folks, the individuals that were actually in the weeds dealing with all the infrastructure issues and projects that the communities had to deal with. And we separated into 2 entities, our technical working committee and our policy advisory committee, which would be individuals of a higher level ranking position, such as CEOs or people that have that final decision in these agencies. We're doing our update as
a goal to capture the new stakeholders that are now present within our plan. As you all are aware of, New Mexico, we had our gubernatorial election a couple years back. Chihuahua, they had their new governor or gubernatorial elections a couple years also. And the Mexican federal government had new presidential elections not too long ago. So when we terminated or finished our 2015 project, all this activity was going on. So now we're able to come back to the table with our updates and bring in all the new stakeholders, all the new administrations, all the individuals that have now been elected into office, and bring them to the table and indicate to them, you know what, here's the opportunity to bring forth your administration's priorities. What do you all think are priority projects for New Mexico and Chihuahua? Our area of influence is the pink area that includes, it's actually a 55-mile zone that includes projects that are felt important by our stakeholders. And our focus area is actually a more zoned in region that takes into consideration higher level of traffic volume and product movement. Our kickoff meeting, which was held May 23rd, actually raised the question, you know, why do we not include I-10 in New Mexico as part of our focus area? And that is actually going to be one of our major topics at our next workshop, which will be at the end of August. So it gives the opportunity for stakeholders, the new stakeholders, to question things from our original Board of Master Plan and to present ideas and new items of importance or inclusion into our Board of Master Plan. What is our timeline? We had our kickoff meeting May 23rd. We will have our second Policy Advisory Committee workshop at the end of the summer, more likely late August or early summer. We do have 2 public meetings, and we found it very important to include the communities, get public input as to what the residents feel are important. What are the individuals that actually use the transportation systems, the private entities, the private companies that use the ports of entries to move their product in and out of? We had, with our original Board of Master Plan, we had 2 public meetings. One was in Santa Teresa, and one was in Deming, Columbus, where we included that portion of our border, to include the input from the residents. You have to excuse myself, I've got allergies, so bear with me here. But again, we have 2 public meetings available for residents to come to the table and give their input as well. Part of our updates is data collection, data collection. We're actually going to review our past data, and since it's already, we're going on 4 years, this gives us the opportunity to include new data from all our stakeholder entities, whether it be federal or state or local, new traffic counts, new crash numbers, new movement, the volume of movement of product coming in and out of New Mexico and Chihuahua. We did the tours of our ports of entries. As you all know, we have 3 ports of entries in New Mexico with Chihuahua or with the Republic of Mexico. The tours were done with our original one, so as it's shown there on the screen, we're done with that portion. But more importantly, with the update, it allows us to collect new data, update our files, what new plans have been brought forth, what data is now available that will enhance our update, our border master plan. This is just an example of one of the pages, one of the informational items that we presented with the Border Master Plan. It's a little far off, but as you can tell, we've indicated what are the road systems that are found within New Mexico and Chihuahua. What's the classification, the volume of traffic, the level of service, things of that nature is what we're going to be soliciting with this new Border Master Plan update. New data to be included into our Border Master Plan. We did our tours, as I mentioned earlier, with our original Border Master Plan. This is the Santa Teresa San Jeronimo Port of Entry. As many of you are aware of, how many of you actually been to the Santa Teresa Port of Entry or been through it? There's been some updates. One of the major things that we found with the original Border Master Plan was the need for expansion. And one item that has already been surfacing with the update is expansion on the Mexican side in terms of the movement of volume of POVs into New Mexico through the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. Just another photo of the Santa Teresa Port of Entry. That's the San Jerónimo view. This is Puerto Palomas, which is the Mexican port of entry for our Columbus POE outside of Deming. This is our public involvement meeting that we had with our original Border Master Plan. And again, this is just to give an example of our outreach that we're going to seek in terms of bringing in the public input into our update. This was in Deming, so we had individuals, residents from Deming, Silver City. We had individuals coming from Palomas, Ascension, Janos. I don't know if you're all familiar with that part of Chihuahua. So again, it gave that opportunity for residents that are affected by the movement of product and people to have voice in our Border Master Plan. And that's something that we really are proud of in terms of allowing the public to put their input. We also had a Policy Advisory Committee meeting in the city of Chihuahua, in Ciudad Chihuahua, where we truly make it a binational approach, which we will also do with our Border Master Plan update, is have a workshop, whether it be in Chihuahua or in Ciudad Juarez, to give more of a feel, more of a binational feel for our workshops. This is another photo of our public meeting in Deming. These are examples of pages that were found in the original Border Master Plan. We were fortunate to receive a lot of information from our Chihuahua counterparts, just some other samples of data that was included in our original Border Master Plan. Salud. Again, this is an overview of the road system in the northern portion of the state of Chihuahua, which is found in our original Border Master Plan. And again, this is all data that we're now in the process of trying to update. This is, again, the priority behind our updates, our workshops, is to include new data. Some more information in terms of trade routes, which were presented. This was information presented from our Mexican counterparts during the Border Master Plan. And what is our planning process, our overview? It's, again, the purpose is to include and bring voice to all the new administrations that have changed, that are now at the table for the New Mexico-Chihuahua Border Master Plan. Collect data on existing and future conditions, as well as identifying what are the new priorities. Are there new priority projects that these new stakeholders feel are important? We divided our Border Master Plan into 3 sections, or 3 areas of emphasis. Rail, multimodal, which included roadway, bicycle, pedestrian, POV, and also port of entry projects, or infrastructure support projects for ports of entries. So those are our 3 areas of emphasis with our Border Master Plan, and which we'll continue on with our updates. The evaluation criteria that we have with our original Border Master Plan will continue with the updates. And as I mentioned, we looked at the 3 types. We looked at ports of entries, multimodal, and rail. That photo is actually a photo from the Antelope Wells ports of entry. How many of you all have been out to the Antelope Wells ports of entry or are familiar? It's really pretty country. It's beautiful country out there. It's out towards the southwestern tip, right next to Sonora and Chihuahua. We do have some crossings. It's mainly POV and pedestrians and some jackrabbits. So we do see some activity, which is some of the update data that will be, okay, one person got that one. Okay, good. So again, this is just an emphasis of collecting new data for our ports of entries. What are some of the criteria? We looked at capacity. the cost effectiveness, the regional benefit that this project would have on our priority list for our border master plan, the project readiness, and what is the binational coordination? How is this project receiving input from both sides of the border, from Mexican entities, U.S. entities, federal, state, and local entities? So it's a combination that gives this border master plan, or any border master plan, more weight in terms of being viewed as an important project. Our update, again, it gives that opportunity to voice your opinions for new priority projects. This is more than just individuals getting together and turning on some lava lamps. This is the opportunity for one person got that one. This is the opportunity for folks to get together and present what they see new, or what they see as a new important project for the border master plan. What are some of our accomplishments? So looking back, what did we do with the original border master plan? And we've had folks come and ask us, you know what, we have all these entities, all these agencies, they have all these plans, and we don't see anything come about of these plans or this effort. Well, fortunately, with this border master plan, our goals are to make priority projects a priority, obviously, but the accomplishments that we saw from our original border master plan included, and this is for our port of entry projects, was the new implementation of a port of entry in Columbus. How many of you all been to Columbus, the port of entry? When's the last time you were out there at Columbus? Okay, so you've seen the development. There's a new port of entry, and it's actually functional. The ribbon cutting will be in the fall, but it's currently being used. This is an overview of the new POE. What occurred prior to the construction was that it was only one entrance into the U.S. or into New Mexico, where you had commercial and POV bottlenecking on that one entrance. With the new construction and the modifications, we have now a designated POV entry and exit, as well as import and export for commercial vehicles. And this was deemed #1 priority project for our border master plan back in 2015. And this is something that we're proud of, indicating to all the stakeholders, is that, you know, the input that we received, obviously the border master plan aided in it. It wasn't the key foundation for the project to come to life, but it aided and it brought that support needed for this project. Some other photos. This is the POE entrance into the U.S., into New Mexico. This is export commercial going into Puerto Palomas. Another accomplishment that we want to show from our original border master plan, this is for our multimodal infrastructure section, projects that were deemed important with our original BMP. The #1 project that was voted on by all members of the border master plan as a priority project was New Mexico 136, which is the highway that connects the Santa Teresa port of entry to the state of Texas. That was #1 priority project. Yes?
So real quickly, just to expand a little bit on what Homer just said, so that being the #1 project, that's a $40 million project that with a typical $28 million annual budget, the district couldn't afford. So by using, Alderman Miller was asking how TxDOT is implementing the plans and the bureaucracy. What we did is I used this plan to indicate the importance to the region, not just to DOT, but to the Mexican side, to Border Patrol, to the industrial park. I was able to use this plan to approach the Secretary's office, the General Office, and rather than this being a 3-phase project, we acquired funding to do it one time. And so that's the importance of incorporating those projects into these plans and using it as a tool to seek funding. It shows the importance to the region, not just to one entity or one government group. So just expanding on the discussion we had earlier today, it wasn't a bureaucratic move. It wasn't part of a red tape. It was a supporting document that allowed us to basically almost double our normal annual budget. So.
Well, my response to that cynically would be that NEPA was planned as a planning document too.
Right.
Look what it's turned into.
Right. Understood.
So getting back to what Mr. Doolittle indicated, this plan gives federal, state, and local entities the opportunity to voice what they deem are priority projects. Now, this was a binational plan, so we had individuals that were from the state of Chihuahua, that were from the municipio de Juarez. We had public input indicating that New Mexico 136 was an important project. It should be deemed as priority project. Why? Because as you all are aware of, how many of you know that this is the only regional overweight, oversized port of entry, Santa Teresa. So we allow vehicles to come into New Mexico at up to 96,000 pounds. The U.S. weight limit is what? 80, yes, 80. So this overweight zone brings in a lot of weight into New Mexico. New Mexico 136 sees a lot of weight going on its road. So this was deemed as an important project by public entities, by private entities. This is a photo of the construction that's actually taking place right now. We're in phase 2, and we should be completed with this project by the end of 2020. Some more photos. How many of you have seen those wind blades on Interstate 10? Okay, well, those are manufactured in South Central Juarez. TPI manufactures those wind blades. They utilize their Santa Teresa port of entry because of the overweight, oversized capacity and designation that this port of entry has. Actually, TPI is going to be coming out with, probably within the next 6 months, wind blades that are 273 feet long. So that's 90 feet, those are 90 yards of a football field that are going to be coming through the Santa Teresa port of entry. So this was important for all the stakeholders that participate in the Border Master Plan. The update gives the new opportunity for the new stakeholders to say, you know what, okay, we got rid of, we accomplished priority project number 1 on POE or for multimodal. This is something else that we need to bring to the attention of federal, state, and local entities, to the Border Master Plan. The Border Master Plans, it gives the opportunity for strength in numbers when it comes to presenting to federal entities. And this is just a group selfie of the May 23rd kickoff meeting. Are there any questions on the update? The New Mexico Chihuahua Policy Advisory Committee workshop updates. It's a long title, but you know, it sounds good. Any questions? Comments? Tomatoes? Anything?
I think we're good. Thank you very much, Omar.
All right, thank you for your time. Thank you.
All right, we've lost quorum, but we can finish off the rest of the meeting here with Executive Director's report, and that there's no action being taken.
So it's almost 3 hours, Mr. Chair. This is punishment for not having a meeting last month.
Right.
So a lesson for quorum. All right, just very quickly, some items. I wanted to, Stephen is here, just wanted to mention the El Paso Mobility Coalition, which is a new group that is recently formed under the umbrella of the El Paso Chamber. We have a representative here that, I don't know, Stephen, if you want to say something very briefly, but really briefly about the coalition.
I'll be very brief because I'm actually more worried about you losing consciousness than quorum. The El Paso Mobility Coalition was formed last year when the Chamber joined together with some business and community leaders like Alderman Miller. And the goal really is to start to advocate more aggressively at the state and federal level for transportation funding for our region. As Director Calvo has mentioned before, and as many of you I think feel, we really want to work together and in one voice. And with that in mind, we've been working very closely together with folks like County Judge Samaniego, Representative Ortega, and others in elected office to try to make sure that we're moving in the same direction, not trying to, I think, force any vision down anyone's throat, but really come together and figure out what we want mobility in El Paso to look like. One of the things that we've heard in Austin is that we're expecting 1 million people to move to Texas in the next 88 years. And we don't know how many of those will be in El Paso, but certainly we would like some folks to come to El Paso. We really have an opportunity here to kind of decide how this city grows. So with that in mind, we've started the process of building those relationships in Austin. We'll be in Austin next week. The commission will be very familiar with our faces by the end of this year. So again, if there are any questions for me, be happy to answer them, but you'll hear more from us soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Stephen. Next item, Sunland Park conformity. As you all know, we are in the process of demonstrating conformity for the city of Sunland Park, which just turned into non-attainment recently. It's been a process. Roger and staff have been working really, really hard, making progress in addressing comments from the federal partners. The deadline is August 3rd, and that's when we turn into pumpkins if we don't get the approval. But we're confident that we'll meet that deadline. Next, just wanted to mention the one of the RMS listening sessions that we had in May with 3 cabinet secretaries for the state of Chihuahua. This was more relevant last month, but just to mention and highlight the good relationship that we have with the state of Chihuahua that we need to continue having. We met with actually 3 cabinet secretaries, Alejandra de la Vega for Economic Development, Gustavo Elizondo, former mayor of Ciudad Juarez, who's now the Secretary of Communications and Public Works, and Luis Felipe Siqueiros, who used to be the director of EPMPO in Ciudad Juarez, who's now the Cabinet Secretary for Urban Development and Environment. So excellent meeting. Their hospitality was tremendous. We met in the city of Chihuahua. It was a great meeting at the Palacio de Gobierno. And then finally, the status of the new round of MPO documents. You have in your packet the schedule, which is the same schedule that we provided in April, and I offered that I was going to be updating you all. So very briefly, just to let you know that we are on target on all the different activities. The congestion management process, the CMP update. We're working with the ad hoc committee, so we're on track to complete that by November. The next, for the new travel demand model, we're on track to working with the City of El Paso procurement so that we can issue the request for qualifications to start the procurement process to hire a consultant to do that. So we're on track. And again, the rest of the activities, we'll be following. So bottom line, we're on track, and we'll continue to inform you of any issues. And then finally, you heard about earlier today, the updates to the current UPWP. Now, we are moving towards the new UPWP, which will cover fiscal years 2020 and 2021. Sorry, there's a typo there. And again, just to let you know, we started the 30-day public involvement on the 19th, a couple days ago, going through July 19th. So any comments that we receive on the UPWP will be addressed, and we'll come back and inform you all. As part of that process, public meeting July the 2nd here at the MPO offices. So again, we'll be here receiving public comments. And all of that is to come up with a draft that we need to submit to TxDOT and New Mexico DOT on August 1st of 2019. So with that, unless you have any questions.
And thank you, Monica, for helping us keep a quorum.
Just so we can close the meeting.
Do we still have a quorum?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right, this moment we take a motion to adjourn.
So bad.
Motion has been seconded, and all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously.
You take care.